Section 1. The emotional architecture of the Simpson family. There is a house at 742 Evergreen Terrace that has been standing for 36 years without aging a single day. The paint on the exterior has never peeled. The lawn has never gone brown in a drought. The mailbox still leans at the same slight angle it did in 1989. Inside that house, 5 people live in a state of perfect preservation, cycling through the same rhythms, the same fights, the same reconciliations, the same Tuesday evenings in front of the television, and nobody inside has ever stopped to wonder why nothing changes. Nobody has asked why the children wake up the same age every morning. Nobody has looked in the mirror and noticed the absence of new lines around their eyes. From the outside, and especially from the outside of someone who grew up watching this show, 742 Evergreen Terrace looks like comedy. It looks like a cartoon house where loud, lovable, ridiculous things happen and everything resolves before the credits roll. That is the surface. That is the version the show presents to anyone who watches casually, anyone who puts it on for background noise, anyone who turns to it for comfort at the end of a hard day. But if you sit with this show long enough, if you let the episodes wash over you in the dark and pay attention not just to the punchlines but to the spaces between them, something else begins to take shape. A different picture of 742 Evergreen Terrace. A different picture of the 5 people inside it. One that is quieter and more complicated and, if you let it, genuinely moving in ways that pure comedy can never quite reach. The Simpsons was never actually a comedy. That is not a provocation. It is a description. The show has always used comedy as its vehicle, the way a river uses its banks. The jokes are real. The absurdity is real. The brilliant, dense, reference-layered writing that defined its peak years is genuinely funny in ways that most television never approaches. None of that is in question. What is in question is the payload the jokes were always carrying. Because underneath every setup and punchline, underneath every couch gag and chalkboard opening, underneath every moment where Homer falls down a cliff, or Bart outruns Principal Skinner, or Lisa makes a speech nobody listens to, there is something else happening. Something the show has been doing since the very beginning without ever quite announcing itself. The Simpsons has always been a story about 5 people who love each other and cannot quite reach each other. A story about a family that holds together through sheer insistence, through the accumulated weight of shared history, in a town and a system that was never designed to help any of them flourish. A story about what happens to ordinary people when the world around them is subtly but persistently hostile, and they have no choice but to keep going anyway. Each member of the Simpson family carries a specific kind of wound. The show established these wounds early, in the first few seasons, before the mythology grew and the plots escalated and the celebrity cameos started piling up. And those wounds never healed. They could not heal. Partly because the floating timeline prevents any real change, but mostly because the wounds are structural. They are baked into who these people are, and who they are has been shaped by forces that predate the show and exist far outside their control. Homer Simpson's wound is the deepest and the least visible from the outside. He is the loudest character in the room, the most physically expressive, the most likely to fill silence with noise. His suffering tends to be played for laughs because it manifests as slapstick, as stumbling incompetence, as the spectacular failure of a man who is constitutionally unable to think before he acts. But the noise is the point. The noise is what Homer does instead of sitting quietly with the thing underneath it. Homer needed his mother, and she was not there. She was not there because a powerful man decided she was dangerous, and the system that should have protected her chose instead to protect the powerful man. Homer grew up with a version of her death that was a lie, told to him by a father who was too afraid or too broken himself to tell the truth. He spent his entire childhood, adolescence, and adult life with a hole in his center shaped exactly like the woman who kissed him goodnight and was gone by morning. Everything Homer does, every strange compulsion, every desperate bid for approval, every moment of cruelty softened immediately by remorse, every time he pulls his family back together after nearly destroying it, traces back to that hole. He eats to fill it. He drinks to quiet it. He laughs too loud and cries too easily and forgives people who absolutely should not be forgiven because the alternative, being the kind of person who pushes people away, is the one thing he cannot be. If he becomes the person people leave, then maybe his mother was right to go. Marge Simpson's wound is the most elegant and the most heartbreaking because it looks, from the outside, like contentment. Marge has what most people in Springfield would say they wanted: a house, a husband who loves her, in his way, 3 children, stability, a role in the community. She has the visible markers of a successful life, and she maintains them with a precision that borders on performance, which is exactly what it is. Marge gave something up to build this life. She gave up the version of herself that existed before the family arrived, the person she was becoming, the ambitions she had that did not fit inside the house on Evergreen Terrace. The show has revisited this sacrifice across dozens of episodes, always gently, always with care for Marge's dignity, but always circling back to the same quiet revelation. Marge is a woman of significant interior life, who has consistently chosen to keep that interior life to herself, because expressing it has rarely been safe. She is not a martyr in the dramatic sense. She does not walk through her days in visible suffering. What she does instead is something more subtle and more devastating. She maintains, she holds, she keeps the structure standing through sheer force of will and patience. And the show acknowledges again and again that this kind of holding has a cost, that the patience has limits, that the blue hair and the steady voice and the hands folded in her lap are a choice she makes every single day, not a natural state. Bart Simpson's wound is the most socially legible because it is expressed as rebellion, and rebellion at least has the advantage of being visible. Bart is the child who understood early that the systems around him were not built for him. School was not built for him. The institutional structures that sort children into futures were not built for a boy with his particular combination of intelligence and restlessness and deep, barely acknowledged need for genuine recognition. He is not stupid. The show has been careful about this across its entire run. Bart is not academically gifted in the way Lisa is, but he is perceptive, inventive, strategically brilliant in ways that formal education is entirely incapable of measuring or rewarding. He reads social dynamics with a precision that most adults never develop. He understands people. He understands what they want and what they fear and how to move within those pressure points. And none of that is worth anything to the system that evaluates him. So he stopped trying to be worth something to it. He decided, somewhere around the age of 10, and in a decision he has been renewing every day since, that if the system would not accommodate him, he would define himself against the system instead. The pranks, the defiance, the cheerful announcement that he is an underachiever and proud of it, all of that is Bart managing the gap between who he is and what the world around him is willing to value. The sadness is in how often the mask slips. In the episodes where Bart reaches for something real, a friendship, a skill, a moment of genuine connection with Homer, and holds it carefully for exactly as long as the show allows before it disappears, in those moments you see the actual Bart, the one underneath the performance. And he is a boy who is trying just as hard as his sister, but in directions that nobody around him is able to recognize or name. Lisa Simpson's wound is loneliness. Pure, structural, inescapable loneliness that exists not because she is unlikable, but because she is operating at a frequency that very few people around her can receive. She is 8 years old and she understands things about the world, about injustice, about art, about the weight of being conscious in a place that rewards unconsciousness, that most adults spend their lives trying to avoid understanding. Being that perceptive, that early, in that environment, is its own kind of suffering. Lisa sees everything and can do almost nothing about it. She is a child in a family that loves her but does not understand her, in a school that tolerates her but resents her excellence, in a town that is structurally opposed to the values she holds most deeply. And she keeps playing her saxophone in her room. She keeps reading. She keeps showing up to argue for things nobody else cares about, not because she believes she will win, but because she cannot do anything else. Because the alternative to caring is becoming someone she does not recognize. The show has always known that Lisa's story is a tragedy. It has never fully committed to showing that on screen because the show is ultimately constructed as comedy, and tragedy requires a different kind of time. But the tragedy is present in every episode where she tries and fails to connect. In every flash forward that shows her adult self still searching for the kind of understanding that Springfield never offered. In every quiet scene where she plays alone and the music is the only thing that does not disappoint her. Maggie, the youngest and the least understood, carries a wound that the show has only ever gestured at. She is present for everything. She sees everything the family does, every argument and reconciliation, every mistake and recovery. She has been absorbing all of it from her position in the stroller, wide-eyed and unreadable, for 36 years. And she says almost nothing. The show presents this as a running joke. A baby who never talks. Funny, because silent things in loud environments are inherently comic. But the silence is not funny when you sit with it long enough. The silence is a decision. A baby surrounded by people who love her and damage each other with that love, who has watched her sister's openness lead to isolation, and her brother's effort lead to failure, and her mother's patience lead to suppression, has learned something that none of them have managed to learn. That staying hidden is a form of protection. That the safest version of love is the kind that observes without being observed. These 5 people live in the same house and love each other genuinely, and the love is real enough that it has held the family together across 36 seasons of everything Springfield has thrown at them. But the love runs alongside the wounds without ever quite touching them. Homer cannot tell Marge what he actually needs because he does not have the language. Marge cannot tell Homer what she gave up because naming it would mean confronting whether it was worth it. Bart cannot tell his father that he wants to be seen as more than a troublemaker. Lisa cannot tell her family that she is lonelier in this house than she would be anywhere else. Maggie watches all of it and keeps her own counsel. The comedy of The Simpsons has always lived in the gap between how much these people love each other and how rarely that love translates into understanding. The laughs come from Homer's attempts to connect that go spectacularly wrong, from Bart's deflections, from Marge's perfectly timed long-suffering sigh. But the thing underneath the laughs, the thing the show has been carrying all this time, is something gentler and more patient. It is the story of 5 ordinary people doing their best in conditions that were never designed for their success. It is a story about a family that stays together not because staying together is easy, but because the idea of not staying together is unbearable. It is a story about love that is imperfect and frequently inarticulate and occasionally destructive and completely, stubbornly, indestructibly real. That story has been playing out at 742 Evergreen Terrace for 36 years. It has been playing out in the background of every joke, waiting patiently for anyone watching closely enough to notice it. And once you notice it, once you see the architecture of these 5 particular wounds and the way the comedy is built on top of them, the show changes. It becomes something different than what you thought it was when you were watching for the punchlines. It becomes the kind of thing you want to watch in the quiet dark, when the day is done and you need something that does not demand anything of you except your attention. Something that breathes at the same pace you do. Something that understands, in its own cartoon way, that the most important things about being human are also the most difficult to say out loud. The Simpsons understood that from the beginning. It just dressed the understanding in yellow skin and 4 fingers, and the specific comedy of a man who cannot go 5 minutes without causing a disaster. But underneath all of it, always, is the family on the couch. The family that stays. The family that forgives. The family that has been sitting in that living room since 1989, and will be sitting there long after the people watching them have changed in ways that Springfield never will. That is what this video is about. 4 hours in Springfield, not the jokes. The thing the jokes have always been protecting. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment with where you are and what time it is. There is something genuinely nice about knowing that someone in a city you have never been to is falling asleep to the same thing you are. And if you have not subscribed yet, consider doing it now. More of this is coming, and you will want to be here for it. Section 2. Homer Simpson and the Anatomy of a Broken Man. Let us begin with the simplest possible question about Homer Simpson. What is wrong with him? Not as a joke. The show makes the joke constantly. Homer is stupid. Homer is lazy. Homer is a figure of spectacular, almost athletic incompetence who has somehow survived in a position that requires him to prevent nuclear disasters, which is itself the darkest punchline the show has ever constructed. The joke version of what is wrong with Homer is so familiar that most people who have watched the show do not really think about it anymore. It is just Homer. That is just how he is. But the show, if you pay attention to it carefully across its full run, does not actually treat Homer's condition as a personality quirk. It treats it as a history. A specific history with specific causes, traceable back through time to specific moments and specific people and specific decisions made on his behalf before he was old enough to have any say in the matter. The story of what is wrong with Homer is the story of a man who was broken by systems larger than himself before he had the chance to become whoever he was supposed to be, and who then lived inside the ruins of that original self for his entire adult life, not knowing what was missing because he had never known it was there. Start with the most literal version. There is a crayon lodged in Homer's brain. It has been there since childhood. The show reveals this in season 12 and handles the revelation with a kind of casual horror that is entirely characteristic of The Simpsons at its most honest. The crayon went up Homer's nose when he was a boy. It penetrated his brain tissue. It has been sitting there, reducing his cognitive function, for decades, and nobody found it. Not his father, not a doctor, not the school system that was ostensibly educating him. Not a single person whose job it was to look after Homer Simpson caught the fact that there was a foreign object in his skull affecting his ability to think. When the crayon is finally removed, as an adult, the change in Homer is immediate and comprehensive. His IQ rises to near genius level. He becomes articulate, analytical, capable of processing the world around him with a clarity that he has never had access to before. He holds a conversation with Lisa in which they connect intellectually in a way they have never managed, and the scene is genuinely moving because you can see what their relationship could have been, what it should have been, if Homer had been allowed to be the person he actually was. But Springfield, as Springfield does, defeats him. His intelligence makes him alienated. The people around him are not equipped to engage with a smarter Homer. His co-workers resent him. The social infrastructure of the town is built for a certain kind of person, and that person is not the one who emerges when the crayon comes out. Homer looks at Springfield with clear eyes for the first time, and what he sees is a town that has no place for him. So he asks for the crayon to go back in. The moment is played for dark comedy, which is exactly the right register for it, but it is also one of the most precise descriptions of a specific kind of suffering that the show ever offers. Homer does not choose stupidity because he prefers it. He chooses it because intelligence, in his environment, is a form of pain. Seeing clearly is worse than not seeing at all when what you see is the full architecture of your own diminishment. The fog is kinder. The fog is survivable. The crayon goes back in, and Homer returns to the version of himself that Springfield knows how to handle. There is a separate level of damage that sits underneath the crayon. The show establishes, across dozens of episodes and through the radiation theory that underscores so much of Springfield's impossible biology, that Homer has been exposed to nuclear contamination for the entirety of his adult working life. The power plant where he works is a facility with 342 safety violations. It has cracked cooling towers patched with chewing gum. It has radioactive waste dumped in public spaces. It has luminous vermin living in its walls. And Homer has been inside this facility, in proximity to an active reactor for decades, eating his lunch there and sleeping at his workstation, and treating the whole enterprise with the relaxed familiarity of a man who has long since stopped perceiving the danger. The physical toll of this is visible in Homer's body. His recovery from injury is not cartoon resilience in the simple sense. It is something stranger. He absorbs punishment that should kill him, falls from heights that should end him, and walks away from explosions that should reduce him to his component parts. His pain tolerance is genuinely inhuman. His healing rate is absurd. These are not presented as superpowers. They are presented as the unremarkable facts of Homer's existence, which is its own kind of disturbing observation about what decades of environmental contamination can do to a human body. But the cognitive damage is the part that matters most for understanding who Homer is. Because every characteristic we read as personality, every trait that defines him as a comic figure, has a second reading as symptom. His inability to remember things that happened 5 minutes ago, his difficulty connecting cause and effect, his tendency to pursue immediate pleasure at the expense of any future consideration, his emotional volatility, swinging from childlike happiness to rage to tearful remorse in the space of minutes. All of these things read as comedy on the surface. Underneath, they form a pattern that is consistent with specific kinds of neurological damage. The show knows this. It is explicit about it. Homer's IQ has been stated as 55, which is a clinical classification. The show's own creator confirmed this number, 55. For context, that score places Homer in a range that most psychologists would describe as significantly impaired. And this is the man who prevents Springfield from experiencing a nuclear meltdown. This is the level of cognition standing between an entire town and radioactive catastrophe, not as a throwaway gag, but as the persistent, daily reality of Springfield's relationship with its primary power source. The question of who Homer could have been, absent all of this damage, is one the show keeps returning to. Remove the crayon and his intelligence is extraordinary. Remove the decades of radiation exposure, and his body would presumably function closer to normal. Remove the trauma of his mother's absence, and the emotional architecture of his life would be built on something other than the terror of being left. The show keeps showing you the man underneath the damage, in flashes, in season 12, in the episodes where Homer connects briefly and beautifully with whoever is in the scene with him, and then the damage reasserts itself and the man disappears again. What makes this sad rather than simply dark is the consistency of Homer's love. He is a man of genuinely enormous love. He loves his family with a ferocity that is completely disproportionate to his ability to express it, which means it comes out sideways. It comes out as overprotection and manipulation and the occasional spectacular act of thoughtlessness, but it is always there. It has never been in question. Even in the episodes where Homer is at his worst, where he embarrasses Lisa in public or fails Bart in ways that matter or takes Marge entirely for granted, the love is visible under the failure. He is not a cruel man. He is an impaired man who loves more than he can articulate and damages what he loves through the simple, sustained effort of being himself. The relationship between Homer and his father, Abe Simpson, is the key to understanding the generational weight of all this. Abe is a man who lived through extraordinary events and came out of them emotionally closed. He is a veteran, a survivor of decades that would test any person's capacity for feeling, and he responded to those tests by building walls that he then passed down to his son as a model for how men in their family dealt with difficulty, not by talking, not by reaching out, by enduring, by going silent, by converting every vulnerable moment into a story, a complaint, an anecdote, anything that kept the actual content of the feeling at a safe distance. Homer grew up in that silence, and it shaped him. The desperation for approval that defines so much of his behavior is a direct product of a childhood with a father who did not know how to say, straightforwardly and without qualification, that his son was loved and worthwhile. Abe was not a monster. The show has been careful about this. He was a man who was broken in his own ways, dealing with his own wounds, doing the best he was capable of, which was nevertheless not enough for the child who needed more from him. There is an episode, one of the quietly devastating ones that the show drops into the middle of a regular season without much warning, where Homer visits his old childhood home and finds evidence of the life he might have had, evidence of who he was before the damage accumulated, evidence of a boy who was curious and enthusiastic and full of potential that never got the conditions it needed to develop. The scene is not played for laughs. It is played for the specific ache of looking at the outline of a self you were never allowed to become. Homer carries that outline with him everywhere. It is present in the rare moments when he shows real insight, when he says something unexpectedly perceptive that cuts through the noise and makes everyone in the room go quiet. It is present in his relationship with Maggie, in the wordless tenderness he shows toward his youngest child, the child who does not demand language from him. It is present in the moments with Lisa where he tries, genuinely tries, to bridge the gap between them and almost makes it. The tragedy of Homer Simpson is not that he is stupid. The tragedy is that the intelligence is there. The capacity is there. Somewhere underneath the crayon and the radiation and the accumulated damage of a lifetime in Springfield's contaminated environment is a person who could have been extraordinary. And that person is not entirely gone. He surfaces briefly in unexpected moments. He is visible in the love Homer has for his family, which is real and enormous and completely genuine even when it is catastrophically expressed. Homer Simpson is a man who was never given the conditions he needed, who was broken by systems he did not choose and did not understand, who built his life out of the available materials, which were insufficient, and held it together through the sheer weight of how much he wanted it to work, who falls down more than anyone around him and gets up every single time, not because he is resilient in some heroic sense, but because getting up is the only option he has ever understood. The show laughs at Homer constantly. It is not wrong to laugh. The comedy is real. But the comedy has always been sitting on top of something that is not funny at all. The story of a man who deserved better than the life Springfield built for him, who never knew he deserved better, and who loves what he has anyway with everything he has got. That is not a punchline. That is the show's thesis. Homer falling down the stairs is a joke. Homer falling down the stairs and then standing up and walking back into the kitchen where his family is eating dinner together is everything The Simpsons has ever been about. The particular texture of Homer's daily life is worth dwelling on, because it contains details that most people who have watched the show do not consciously register but that accumulate over time into a portrait of extraordinary specificity. The way he eats, with an urgency that suggests scarcity, with a sensory focus that treats each donut or pork chop as a small emergency requiring immediate resolution. The way he sleeps, at any opportunity, in any position, as though his body is always trying to steal rest that his life never quite allows. The way he interacts with television, which is his primary interface with a world that he finds otherwise too difficult to navigate, a medium that delivers experience without requiring reciprocity. These are the behaviors of a man who has learned to find satisfaction in the things that cannot disappoint him. Food delivers, television delivers, beer delivers. These are reliable. They do not require Homer to be more capable than he is. They do not expose the gap between who he is and who he might have been. They are the infrastructure of a life designed for surviving rather than for flourishing, and Homer has inhabited that infrastructure with a contentment that might be the saddest thing about him, because he is content. Not always, not in every moment, but in the deep structural sense, Homer accepts his life. He does not lie awake aching for the version of himself that would have existed without the crayon. He does not spend his evenings in quiet mourning for Mona Simpson, for the mother who should have been there. He does not think about the intelligence that sits walled off behind the damage, pressing occasionally against the wall and then retreating. He lives inside what he has and he loves it, genuinely. With all the limited but enormous capacity for love that his damaged brain can generate, the show has given Homer flashes of self-awareness across its run. Moments where he seems to understand, briefly, the contours of his own situation. These moments are always quickly dissolved, always followed by a joke or a distraction that pulls him back into the comfortable numbness. But they happen, they recur. And each time they do, there is the same quality to them. A quiet, momentary recognition that passes across Homer's face before the moment closes. He knows something is missing. He does not know what it is. He has been living with the absence long enough that it no longer announces itself as absence. It has become the texture of things, the background radiation of his consciousness, something he carries without examining, because examining it would require a kind of cognitive reach that the damage has made unavailable to him. Homer Simpson is, when you add all of this up, one of the most fully realized portraits of a specific kind of human experience in the history of television. The experience of being limited, of living at a fraction of your capacity because the world around you never invested in the other fractions, of loving genuinely in conditions that were never designed for love to be easy, of failing repeatedly and publicly and without grace and still, somehow, being the person your family comes home to. He is not a hero. He is not meant to be. He is a man at the center of an American family, bearing the weight of everything that built him and the weight of everything that depends on him, and doing it all badly enough to be funny and well enough to keep the story going. That is Homer Simpson. That is what the show has always been doing with him. 36 seasons of a man falling down and getting up, not because the show needs a physical comedian, but because that image, the stumbling, recovering, forward-moving image of a damaged person who refuses to stop, is the most honest thing The Simpsons has ever offered us. Section 3. Marge Simpson, the most tragic character on television. The camera rarely lingers on Marge. This is by design. Marge is the structural center of the family, the load-bearing wall that everything else rests on, and the show treats her with the specific obliviousness that structural walls receive. You do not notice them until they are gone. You do not appreciate them until the ceiling starts to move. Marge stands in the kitchen, or at the foot of the stairs, or in the driver's seat on a family trip, and the action happens around her, and the camera follows the action. Marge is the context. Everyone else is the story. This is itself a statement about her life. There is a version of Marge Simpson that exists in the margins of the episodes, visible if you are looking for her, that is entirely different from the patient, stabilizing, blue-haired presence that most people carry as their mental image of her. This version of Marge is a person of genuine intellectual ambition. She is creative. She is analytical in ways that her husband cannot be and her children do not appreciate. She has artistic sensibility, professional capability, an interior life of significant depth and complexity. All of this is present in the show. It surfaces in specific episodes, specific moments, and then disappears again as the family's needs reassert their gravity and pull her back to the kitchen. The blue hair is the first thing anyone thinks of when they think of Marge. It is her visual signature, the most immediately recognizable thing about her appearance, the thing that distinguishes her from every other character in the show's animation. It grows straight up in a tower that defies physics. It has been exactly this way for 36 years. Marge maintains it in this shape every day of her life, without variation or interruption. The blue hair is a performance. The show does not say this directly, but it says it obliquely in the episode where Marge colors her hair brown to escape the visibility that comes with being recognizable as herself. In that episode, she describes, with a clarity that arrives and then retreats, what it feels like to move through the world as someone who is not immediately read as Marge Simpson. She can be anonymous. She can be whoever she decides to be. She can go through an afternoon without the accumulated weight of what everyone around her expects from the woman with the blue tower of hair. It is a small freedom, and the show treats it as comedy, but the comedy is organized around a real observation. Marge's visual signature is also her cage. The blue hair marks her as a specific person with a specific role and a specific set of obligations, and every time she maintains it, every time she teases it up to its impossible height, she is choosing to remain inside that role. The choice is conscious. The performance is intentional. And the cost of the performance, the daily recommitment to being the stable, patient, available Marge Simpson that her family requires, is something the show acknowledges without fully naming. Consider what Marge gave up. The show has returned to this question across its entire run, each time from a slightly different angle, and the cumulative picture is detailed enough to understand clearly. Marge had ambitions that predated Homer and the children and 742 Evergreen Terrace. She had a vision of her own future that included a professional self, a creative self, an autonomous self with achievements that belonged entirely to her. These ambitions were not grandiose. They were the normal, reasonable ambitions of a person who was aware of her own capacity and wanted to see it realized. She became a police officer and was good at it. She became a painter and produced work of genuine merit. She became a real estate agent and demonstrated a natural aptitude for business that surprised everyone, including herself. She pursued each of these paths with the same methodical competence she brings to everything, and in each case the path closed. Sometimes it closed because of something Homer did. Sometimes it closed because of the competing demands of the family. Sometimes it closed simply because the specific combination of who Marge is and what Springfield is does not produce the conditions under which her particular talents are allowed to fully develop. And she went back to the kitchen. She went back to maintaining the house and managing the family and being the person who knows where everything is and remembers every appointment and makes sure the bills are paid and the children are fed and the emotional temperature of the household is kept within survivable range. The suppression of Marge's anger is the show's most persistent and most quiet act of characterization. Marge does not get angry. This is presented, in the show's early seasons, as a virtue. She is the patient one. She is the one who holds it together while everyone around her falls apart. Her composure in the face of Homer's disasters is a source of comedy and also, in a subtler register, a source of reassurance. As long as Marge is not angry, the household has not reached a genuinely dangerous state, but anger deferred is not anger dissolved. The show knows this, and it demonstrates it in the episodes where Marge's composure breaks down. When the pressure builds past a certain threshold and the patient surface cracks, and what comes out is not gentle disappointment but something with more heat in it. These moments are handled carefully by the show, with a visible unease, as though the show itself is aware that allowing Marge to fully express her anger would destabilize the family in ways that the narrative cannot easily repair. There is a season in which Marge develops a gambling addiction. This storyline is one of the most honest things the show has ever produced about Marge's interior life, and it is largely remembered as a comedy episode about slot machines. But what the gambling is actually doing, if you follow it carefully, is providing Marge with the one thing her life systematically denies her: sensation, unpredictability, a space where she is responding to something external rather than generating stability for something else. The casino is the one place in Springfield where Marge does not have to be the one holding things together. The machine in front of her doesn't need her to be patient. It doesn't need her to be available. It just needs her to pull the lever, and something happens that has nothing to do with her carefully maintained competence. That is what the addiction is about, not the money. Not even the specific pleasure of gambling. The pleasure of being in a situation where she is the one being acted upon, where the responsibility is temporarily, blissfully not hers. And when the family intervenes, when Homer assembles a loving but clueless intervention to bring her back from the casino, the show does not quite allow itself to say the obvious thing, that the reason she needed the escape in the first place is the same reason she will need it again. That the conditions that drove her to the slots have not changed. That going home means going back to being the structural support for everyone else's life. Marge's relationship with Homer is one of the most analyzed things about the show, and for good reason. It is complicated in ways that most television couples, especially in animated shows, never approach. Homer is not a good husband in any conventional sense. He is inattentive, unreliable, frequently embarrassing, occasionally humiliating, and constitutionally incapable of the kind of consistent, thoughtful partnership that Marge would have flourished alongside. He forgets anniversaries. He makes unilateral decisions that affect the whole family. He exposes Marge to social situations that she finds mortifying. He does all of this without malice, which is almost worse, because there is nothing to confront. There is no villain. There is just Homer, trying in his limited way, falling short in predictable ways, and genuinely unable to understand exactly where he went wrong. And yet, the relationship is real. The love between Homer and Marge is one of the show's most carefully protected truths, the thing it consistently refuses to undermine, despite spending 36 seasons exploring every way in which it should not work. Every episode where their marriage is tested, where Marge reaches the edge of what she can absorb and Homer does something that would reasonably end a real marriage, resolves with the two of them finding their way back. Not because the show is sentimental, because the show understands that the love is genuine, and genuine love has a specific gravitational pull that keeps two people circling each other even when the orbit is imperfect. What Marge gets from Homer is harder to articulate than what Homer gets from Marge, which is probably why the show spends less time on it. Homer gives Marge permission. He is so completely himself, so undefended, so incapable of performing a version of himself that is more acceptable to his social environment, that he creates a space around him where the performance becomes unnecessary. When you are with someone who cannot pretend to be better than he is, the pressure to pretend to be better than you are decreases. Marge, in Homer's company, can put down some of the performance. Not all of it, but some. There is a recurring visual in the show of Homer and Marge in bed. Not a significant story beat, just a recurring image. The lights out, the house quiet, the two of them in the dark, Homer's arm around her, or her hand on his. The day put away, the family responsibilities suspended for the hours when the house sleeps. In those quiet frames, you can sometimes see the version of Marge that exists when nobody needs anything from her. Relaxed, present, herself, in the specific way that being deeply yourself requires the right company. It is never the subject of an episode. It is just a recurring image, placed deliberately, that tells you something the show does not have the time or the inclination to say directly. That the marriage works in ways that are not visible during the hours when the family is in motion. That the love is accessible even when everything else is difficult. That the structural wall has someone who leans on it as well as leaning against it. Marge's relationship with her daughters is its own study. With Bart, she operates from a place of unconditional love that has been tested severely and remains intact. She knows who Bart is. She sees the real boy beneath the performance, and she does not require him to be different to earn her love. With Lisa, the relationship is warmer and more fraught, because Lisa is the child who most closely resembles the version of Marge that could have been, the ambitious version, the one who wanted more than the kitchen offered. And watching Lisa pursue the things she herself set aside produces in Marge a complicated mixture of pride and something that might be grief. The show has touched on this, carefully. The episode where Marge realizes that she has been discouraging Lisa's musical ambitions because music was something Marge herself wanted and gave up. The episode where Marge is confronted with evidence that Lisa finds her mother's life, the domestic stability of it, the circumscribed scope of it, not aspirational, not the model she is building toward. These moments produce in Marge the same quality of quiet devastation that the show reserves for its most honest observations. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. The hair comes up again. It always comes back to the hair, because it is the show's most concentrated symbol for everything the Marge question involves. The impossibly maintained Tower of Blue has been there since the beginning. It was there in the flashback episodes that showed Marge before the family. It will presumably be there in whatever future episodes the show eventually produces. It does not grow. It does not change. It is as frozen as everything else in Springfield. But in the real world, hair that is maintained the same way every day for 36 years is not a natural object. It is a project, a sustained, daily commitment to a specific presentation of self. Marge teases her hair up to that height and keeps it there because that is who she is, the person with the blue tower, the stable one, the structural support. And every morning, presumably, she makes the same choice, to be that person again, to maintain the presentation, to keep the wall standing. The tragedy of Marge Simpson is not that she is unhappy. The show does not, on balance, portray her as an unhappy person. She has moments of real joy. The episodes where she finds something that is entirely hers, a project or an expression that belongs to her alone, she is luminous. The show knows how to show Marge happy, and what it shows is a person of enormous vitality when the conditions are right. The tragedy is that the conditions are so rarely right, that the structure she maintains consumes most of the energy that could otherwise go into being that luminous version of herself, that the people she maintains it for are grateful but not always aware, that she chose this and goes on choosing it every day. And the choosing is real, and the love behind it is real, and the cost of it is also real, and the show has the courage to hold all three of those truths simultaneously without resolving them into a simpler story. That is Marge Simpson, the most important character in the show, the least visible one, the one the camera treats as context while it follows everyone else into the story, the one who keeps the house standing so that everyone else can have stories to be in. Section 4. Bart Simpson, the boy who learned that nothing matters. Bart Simpson was the face of the show before the show had fully found its soul. In the early years, before the mythology deepened and the family dynamics became the emotional core of the series, Bart was the character that marketing chose, that merchandise emphasized, that people quoted at each other in schoolyards. He was the one on the t-shirts. He was the one whose catchphrases became cultural currency in a way that the more interior characters never quite managed. Eat my shorts. Don't have a cow. Cowabunga. There is something appropriate and also something slightly melancholy about Bart being the character who got reduced to catchphrases. Because the catchphrases are the armor, and the armor is exactly what Bart spent his entire childhood constructing. The quips, the defiance, the performative indifference to consequences. These are not personality traits. Exactly. They are the architecture of a defense system that Bart built around himself early, the moment he understood that the systems around him were not going to accommodate what he actually was. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. This means he has been in the 4th grade at Springfield Elementary under the supervision of Mrs. Krabappel, failing to complete assignments and disrupting class and collecting detentions for a period of time that is longer than any human child has ever spent in elementary school. The floating timeline produces a lot of absurdities, but none of them quite captures the specific horror of Bart's situation the way this one does. He is trapped in the 4th grade, not metaphorically, literally. He cannot age out of the class. He cannot fail forward into whatever comes next. He is in the 4th grade forever, and the 4th grade is designed for a kind of child that he has never been. The academic failure is the first thing most people would identify as Bart's central characteristic, and it is worth taking seriously rather than treating as a setup for jokes. Bart does not lack intelligence. This has been established clearly enough across the run of the show that it cannot seriously be disputed. He is perceptive, strategic, socially intelligent, and creatively capable in ways that operate entirely outside the formal curriculum that the school is using to evaluate him. His intelligence is real. His failure is not evidence of its absence. His failure is evidence of a mismatch. There is a particular kind of child that educational systems are built for, the kind that can sit still, the kind that can defer gratification, the kind that can engage with abstract material in a linear, sequential fashion and demonstrate that engagement through written responses to predetermined questions, the kind that has a stable enough home environment to complete homework and arrive at school fed and rested and ready to perform the specific cognitive rituals that the system rewards. Bart is not this child. He never has been. He is the kind of child whose intelligence expresses itself laterally, associatively, practically, in ways that do not translate to test scores or homework completion rates, or the behavioral metrics that determine whether a student is considered on track. He is the kind of child who could build something extraordinary if given the materials and the space and the time, but who in the current arrangement is just a kid who failed another spelling test. The show has been generous with Bart across its run, occasionally allowing him episodes in which his actual capacities are visible. Episodes in which he demonstrates leadership, empathy, practical problem-solving, and a genuine gift for connecting with people who are outside his expected social category. An old man who becomes his unlikely mentor, a younger student who needs someone to advocate for him, an opponent who becomes a friend once the structured adversarialism of their situation is removed. In all of these episodes, the real Bart is briefly available, the boy underneath the armor, and he is a person of considerable warmth and capability. And then the episode ends. The armor goes back on. The fourth grade continues. Bart's relationship with Homer is the most important relationship in his life and also the most consistently damaging one. Homer loves Bart. This is not in question. But the specific way Homer loves Bart, enthusiastically and impulsively, and with a complete absence of strategic thought about what Bart actually needs from him, produces an environment in which Bart rarely feels genuinely seen. Homer responds to Bart's surface, to the pranks and the defiance and the jokes, because those are the parts of Bart that are loudest and most accessible to a man of Homer's cognitive limitations. The quieter parts, the ones that contain the real Bart, pass beneath Homer's notice. The strangling, Homer's reflexive response to Bart's provocations, is one of the show's most iconic running gags, and also one of its darkest characterizations of their relationship. Homer grabs Bart by the throat and throttles him, briefly, cartoonishly, in a gesture of frustrated parental exasperation. The show has always played this as comedy, and it is comedy, but it is also the most literal visualization of a specific failure in their relationship. Homer's response to Bart being too much for him is physical, not thoughtful, not patient, not an attempt to understand what is actually going on with his son. A physical response to a feeling that Homer cannot otherwise process. Bart learned early that the way to manage Homer is to be loud enough and funny enough that Homer's responses, including the strangling, stay in the register of performance rather than genuine conflict. As long as the dynamic is a game, as long as the provocations and the retaliations are operating inside a shared script, nobody has to access the real version of what is happening between them. The game keeps them together. It keeps them in the same register. It prevents the kind of direct confrontation that would require both of them to be more vulnerable than they know how to be. There are episodes, and they are the ones that stay with you, where the script breaks down, where Bart does something that pulls Homer out of the game and into something more direct, or where Homer's failure crosses a line that Bart's armor is not thick enough to absorb. In these episodes, the relationship shows its real contours. How much Bart wants his father's genuine attention and approval, not the broad, reflexive affection Homer offers by default, but the specific, attentive regard that says, "I see you, the actual you, and I think you are worth something." How rarely Homer manages to provide it. How the want and the failure keep cycling, episode after episode, with brief reconciliations that both of them invest enormous hope in and that never quite manage to resolve the underlying issue. The relationship with Lisa is its own category. Bart and Lisa should not get along. By any conventional social logic, a 10-year-old boy who is failing school and a precocious 8-year-old genius with strong opinions about everything should be in a state of sustained mutual irritation. And they often are. The show leans into this, producing comedy from their bickering, their competitions, their fundamental incompatibility as personalities. But the show also keeps returning to the thing underneath the bickering. The fact that Bart and Lisa are the only two people in each other's lives who fully understand what it is to be a Simpson child in this particular family. They share a specific knowledge of Homer and Marge, of 742 Evergreen Terrace, of what it is like to grow up in the specific environment their family creates. Nobody else has that knowledge. Nobody else can use it. And in the moments when the competition drops away and the knowledge becomes more important than the performance, Bart and Lisa are each other's most important people. The episode where Lisa gets a pony is one of the clearest examples. Bart's jealousy is real and properly motivated, and the show does not dismiss it. But what the episode ultimately shows is Bart advocating for Lisa, protecting her interests because the love is real underneath the competition. He is not performing goodness for an audience. He is being good to his sister in a moment when nobody is watching, which is the only kind of goodness that counts. Bart's friendship with Milhouse Van Houten deserves attention because it is one of the show's most honest portraits of a specific kind of male friendship. The kind that is never directly emotional, but in which the emotional content is completely visible to everyone paying attention. Milhouse is Bart's most consistent companion, the person who shows up when everything else is in flux, the one who Bart knows will be there because Bart's company is, for Milhouse, the center of his social universe. Bart is not always good to Milhouse. He is frequently careless with him, occasionally exploitative, sometimes willing to use Milhouse's loyalty in ways that cross into cruelty. The show does not excuse this. It shows it clearly, including the consequences, including the moments when Milhouse's patient accommodation of Bart's behavior reveals the degree to which Bart takes it for granted. But Bart also, in the episodes where it matters, shows up for Milhouse. He advocates for him. He defends him. He is sometimes the only person in Milhouse's life who treats him as a person worth defending, and Milhouse knows this, and it is why the friendship survives the carelessness. Under all of this, underneath the armor and the performance and the carefully maintained defiance, Bart is a boy in pain. The pain is quiet and usually well buried, but the show returns to it because the show knows it is there. He does not believe in his own future. The academic failure, the institutional rejection, the repeated experience of being evaluated and found wanting by systems that are not designed for him, has produced in Bart a relationship with his own potential that is characterized by preemptive resignation. Why work toward a future when the evidence suggests the future is not arranged for people like him? The couch, the one at 742 Evergreen Terrace, is where Bart ends up. In the evenings, after the episode's plot has resolved, the family assembles and the television goes on, and they are together in the specific way that the Simpsons are always together, close enough to touch and emotionally at various distances from each other. Bart sits on that couch with a quality of stillness that is unusual for him. The performance is suspended. He is just Bart, on the couch, in the house he grew up in, not going anywhere. The looping of the show, the impossibility of progression, the fact that Bart will never be 11, is cruelest to him. He is the character who most visibly chafes against the limitations of his situation. The other family members have found accommodations with Springfield's impossible stasis. Homer is too impaired to fully register it. Marge is too invested in maintaining it. Lisa is too young to have expected anything different. Maggie barely registers as present in the conventional sense. But Bart is old enough to want things and young enough to have not yet accepted that wanting is futile. He is the right age, exactly and permanently, for the specific torture of wanting to go somewhere and being unable to move. That is Bart Simpson, the face of the show in its early years. The one on the t-shirts? The boy who told the world not to have a cow and built an armor so effective that most of the world never looked past it? Underneath the armor is a kid who is trying harder than anyone around him gives him credit for, in directions that the world around him was not built to reward, with a heart that is large enough to keep showing up even when showing up has never once been enough to change anything. Section 5. Lisa Simpson, the loneliest genius in television history. There is a scene that the show returns to in variations across its entire run. Lisa is alone in her room. She is sitting at the window, or at her desk, or on the edge of her bed. She picks up her saxophone, or opens a book, or stares at something outside the window that the camera does not show us. And she is by herself in a way that is not incidental to the scene but is the subject of it. The aloneness is the content. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she has been processing the world at a frequency that almost nobody around her can receive since the show began. Her intelligence is not a superpower in the dramatic sense. It is not a device the show uses to generate plots about child prodigies. It is a characterization tool, and what it characterizes is the specific texture of being significantly more aware than your environment, which in Lisa's case means being significantly more aware than almost everyone she knows, in a town that was designed to not reward awareness. She knows things she has no comfortable way to share. She understands the politics of Springfield, the economic structures that keep people in place, the environmental contamination that the show gestures at without ever fully confronting. She understands her father's limitations in ways that she cannot express without causing damage. She understands her mother's suppressed life in ways that nobody in the family has acknowledged. She understands her own position, the 8-year-old genius in the 4th grade, and what it means for how she will move through the world. Understanding this much, this early, with this little social infrastructure to support the understanding, is its own category of hard. The saxophone is the most important object in the show. Not Homer's donuts, not Bart's skateboard, not the pacifier that Maggie carries through every scene. The saxophone, specifically Lisa's saxophone, is the show's most concentrated symbol for the thing that saves her. Music is the one language that does not require translation into the social codes of Springfield. When Lisa plays, she is not performing intelligence or managing her effect on the people around her. She is just present with something that responds to her as she actually is, rather than as the context requires her to be. The show has always understood this. The episodes centered on Lisa's musical life are consistently among the most emotionally honest the show produces. The episode where she learns from a jazz musician who sees her talent clearly and becomes the father figure she does not quite have at home. The episode where she is forced to perform cheerfully when she does not feel cheerful, and the music becomes the one place she can tell the truth. The episode where she loses the saxophone, briefly, and the quality of the loss in her face tells you everything about what it means to her. Lisa's relationship with her father is the one that the show has been most careful with, because it is the most complicated and the most freighted with potential damage. Homer loves Lisa enormously, demonstrably, in ways that transcend his usual limitations and produce, occasionally, moments of connection that are among the most moving things the show has done. The episode where Homer learns to be proud of Lisa at a band competition. The episode where they attend a father-daughter event, and Homer sees, clearly, that he has been failing her in a specific and preventable way and chooses to do better. These episodes work because they are grounded in something real. Homer's love for Lisa is not in question. What is in question is whether the love is accompanied by the specific kind of attentiveness that Lisa needs. She needs to be seen. Not generally. Not in the broad, affectionate way that Homer sees all of his children as extensions of himself that he loves and would protect with his life. She needs to be seen specifically. Seen as the particular, complicated, isolated, passionate person she is. Seen as someone whose intelligence is not a social obstacle to be managed, but a genuine aspect of herself that is worth understanding on its own terms. Homer is capable of this. The show has shown it. In the moments when his attention is fully present, when he is not distracted by his own desires or needs or disasters, he can see Lisa with a clarity that surprises her. These moments are treasured by both of them, stored carefully, returned to in later episodes as touchstones. But they are not the daily texture of their relationship. The daily texture is Homer's attention divided among too many competing claims, Lisa's need going unmet more often than met, and the gap between what she needs and what she receives being managed by the saxophone and the books and the room with the door closed. The relationship with Marge is warmer and more comfortable, but also carries its own specific tension. Marge loves Lisa and is proud of her in ways she does not always know how to express. But Marge's mode of loving is attentive to the domestic surface, to whether Lisa has eaten, whether she is physically comfortable, whether the visible metrics of her well-being are in order. The interior of Lisa, the vast and complex interior that is the actual site of her life, is harder for Marge to access. Not because Marge does not care, because the interior is so busy and so complex that engaging with it fully would require an investment of time and energy that the household's demands do not readily allow. Lisa has understood this. She has adapted. She does not bring everything to Marge, only the things that translate into the register Marge can receive. The rest she takes to her room, to the saxophone, to the books, to the private world she has built in the space between what she needs and what is available. The show's willingness to let Lisa be genuinely lonely, not temporarily lonely, not lonely in a way that resolves in the third act, but structurally, constitutionally, persistently lonely as a result of who she is one of its most unusual choices. Television, especially animated television aimed at families, usually resolves the isolation of its intelligent characters. The genius finds their people. The unusual child discovers a community that appreciates what the ordinary world missed. Lisa never quite gets this. She gets moments of connection, brief and real and then gone, but the structural isolation remains. The show has imagined Lisa's future. In the flash-forward episode, she is 23. She is engaged to be married to an Englishman she met at college. She is accomplished and purposeful and has the kind of elegant self-possession that is the adult form of the small girl's intensity. She has grown into herself. She has found, outside Springfield, something like the life her intelligence was always pointing toward. But the flash-forward is not the actual future. It is a glimpse through a window that closes immediately. Lisa goes back to being 8. The adult self disappears. And the show continues, with Lisa in the 4th grade, with the saxophone in her room, with the persistent, beautiful, heartbreaking aloneness of a person who understands everything and can reach almost nothing. The essay she writes that never gets heard. The speech she gives to the empty auditorium. The saxophone phrase she plays at 2 in the morning while the rest of the house sleeps. These are the textures of Lisa's life in Springfield, and they constitute a kind of presence that the show treats with more care than any of the plot mechanics that surround them. Lisa sitting alone in her room, playing the saxophone, is the truest image the show has of what it is to be alive and aware in a world that is not quite ready for you. Section 6. The nuclear family that lives next to a nuclear plant. There is a specific kind of tension that comes from beauty and threat existing in the same frame. A sunset over a factory. A garden at the edge of a contaminated field. The way that dangerous things can produce a kind of visual peace when you are far enough from them to see only the surface. Springfield's nuclear power plant is always visible from certain parts of town. Its cooling towers rise above the residential rooflines in the background of outdoor scenes, a permanent fixture of the Springfield skyline, so familiar that nobody looks at it anymore. Not the residents, not the show's own visual grammar, which places it in backgrounds without comment, the way you might place a water tower or a church steeple. It is just there. It has always been there. It will always be there. The casual integration of the power plant into Springfield's landscape is one of the show's most quietly disturbing formal choices. It is visible from the school. It is visible from the park. It is visible from residential streets where children play and where the Simpsons dog takes his afternoon walks. The contamination source is not somewhere else. It is not in an industrial zone at the city's periphery. It is woven into the fabric of every outdoor scene, as constant and as unremarked as the horizon. This is not accident. Matt Groening and the show's writers made deliberate choices about Springfield's visual geography, and those choices consistently place the source of the town's damage at the center of its daily life. You cannot look at Springfield from outside it without seeing the cooling towers. The residents, from inside it, have stopped seeing them altogether. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace is, within the established geography of the show, not far from the plant. Homer's commute is short. He walks to work in some episodes, drives in others, but the distance is never presented as significant. The family lives close enough to the facility that they drink the water it has been contaminating, breathe the air it has been irradiating, and exist within the environmental footprint of its decades of safety violations. The house itself is worth paying attention to as an object because it functions, across the show's run, as a character in its own right. It has a personality, it has a mood, it responds to what happens inside it in ways that most television houses, even in animated shows, do not. When the family is in conflict, the house feels smaller, the rooms more compressed. When there is peace, there is a quality of light in the kitchen scenes that suggests something like warmth, a specific animation choice that the show uses deliberately to signal the temperature of the household's emotional life. The living room is the center. The couch that the opening sequence deposits the family onto is the gravitational center of the house and, in a real sense, of the show itself. Everything comes back to the couch. Every episode, regardless of how far it travels in its plot, returns to the couch. The family assembles there. The television goes on. The domestic ritual reasserts itself. The couch is the proof that the family is still together, that the centrifugal forces of each episode's story have not finally succeeded in dispersing them. The architecture of the town around the house is worth considering in the same register. Springfield is a town that contains everything a town needs, and several things no town should have. The school, the hospital, the bar, the church, the nuclear power plant, these are not arranged according to conventional urban planning logic, because Springfield's geography is responsive to narrative rather than realistic. Moe's Tavern is always walkable from wherever Homer is. The power plant is always within commuting distance. The school is always close enough for the children to attend on foot. The town reshapes itself to serve the needs of the story. But the arrangement tells you something about the story's priorities. The power plant is always central because the power plant is always the central fact of Springfield's existence. It powers the town, it employs its residents, it contaminates its environment. It represents the economic reality that traps the Simpson family in place as effectively as any prison. Homer cannot leave the plant because the plant is the only employer in Springfield that offers him the kind of job stability that the deal between Burns and Grandpa Abe guarantees. He is not free to seek other employment. He is not positioned to do so even if he were free. The plant and Homer are bound together by history and economics and the specific architecture of their mutual entrapment. Springfield's other institutions are mirrors of the plant's relationship to the family. The school fails Bart. Not catastrophically, not with malice, but persistently, in the way that institutional indifference fails children who do not fit the template. Principal Skinner is not a villain. Mrs. Crabapple is not a villain. The school is an institution shaped by forces beyond its control, underfunded, understaffed, operating with a curriculum designed for a specific kind of child and applied uniformly to all of them. Bart does not fit the template. The institution notices this and responds with detention and failing grades, and the accumulated weight of the verdict that he is not the right kind of student. The hospital is comedy, reliably, in the way that American healthcare institutions are reliably comic. Dr. Nick Riviera is the show's most sustained joke about medical incompetence, a doctor so underqualified that his continued practice is a public health concern in its own right. But Dr. Nick is not the only medical professional in Springfield. The more respectable practitioners are present too, and their presence raises a question that the comedy does not quite muffle. If competent doctors are available in Springfield, if the medical infrastructure exists to catch obvious problems, why did nobody catch the crayon in Homer's brain? Why did nobody, in 30 years of routine visits, identify a foreign object lodged in the skull of a man who works at a nuclear power plant? The question hangs over every scene set in Springfield's medical facilities, not as accusation exactly, as atmosphere, as one of many details that, when taken together, suggest a town in which certain things are not looked at too closely, in which the institutional tendency to normalize is more powerful than the institutional tendency to investigate. Moe's Tavern is the third institution in Homer's life, and it functions with a specificity that the show rarely pauses to acknowledge. It is where Homer goes when the house is too much, when the noise of his own life exceeds his capacity to manage it. It is his social space, his community of peers, his environment of genuine choice rather than obligation. The show has always treated the tavern with a kind of affection that borders on the elegiac, because the tavern is the one place in Springfield where Homer is not required to be a husband or a father or a safety inspector or anything other than a man who wants a beer and the company of people who are not asking anything of him. The regulars at Moe's, the small constellation of Springfield men who appear on the same bar stools with the same reliability as the couch absorbs the Simpson family at the end of each episode, are Homer's actual peer group. Barney, whose collapse into alcoholism is played for comedy but whose history suggests a man who was derailed from a promising trajectory by the same ambient forces that derail everyone in Springfield. Lenny and Carl, Homer's co-workers, whose friendship with Homer is genuine and whose limitations mirror his in ways that make them comfortable company. Moe himself, Bitter and kind in equal measure, the bar's permanent emotional center. The social life of Springfield's men, as the show portrays it, is organized almost entirely around proximity and inertia. They are there because they have always been there. Because the town does not offer many alternatives. Because the specific kind of male sociality that the show depicts, sitting near each other without necessarily saying anything meaningful, being together without necessarily connecting, is the mode of community that the environment has made available. The church, First Church of Springfield, is the final institution of note. It is where Ned Flanders lives out his faith, where the Simpsons appear occasionally with the irregularity of people who attend church more out of social obligation than conviction, where Reverend Lovejoy delivers sermons that the show uses as a kind of moral temperature gauge. The church is present and active and completely incapable of addressing the actual moral crises that accumulate in Springfield week after week. It is an institution that exists to process the normal, the expected, the ritually appropriate, and Springfield keeps generating things that are well outside those categories. The physical environment of Springfield, taken as a whole, is a portrait of a specific kind of American town. The kind that developed around a single large employer. The kind where the economy and the ecology and the social fabric are all entangled with the health of that one institution. The kind where challenging the employer means challenging the town, because the town is the employer, functionally, and the residents know it, and the knowledge shapes everything from the water they drink to the questions they choose not to ask. The nuclear family lives next to the nuclear plant. The family is contaminated, in the broadest possible sense, by the plant. Not only physically, the plant shapes the economic conditions that keep Homer in his job and the family in their house. It shapes the political environment that allows Burns to maintain his power over the town. It shapes the social environment in which the residents have reached a kind of collective accommodation with facts that should disturb them. The plant is the first condition of Springfield's existence, and the family at 742 Evergreen Terrace is the most visible product of that condition. The house has yellow wallpaper. The residents have yellow skin. The fish in the river have 3 eyes. The cooling towers have cracked walls patched with gum. All of these details exist in the same visual frame, in the same town, in the same story, and the show has been asking, quietly, from the beginning, whether we can hold them all together and follow the logic to its conclusion. The conclusion is that the physical environment is not incidental, that where you live shapes who you become, that the specific conditions of a specific place produce specific kinds of people, and specific kinds of problems, and specific kinds of love, and specific kinds of damage, and that a family, even a loving family, even the most resilient and persistent and indestructible family in the history of American television, cannot fully protect itself from the environment it is embedded in. The Simpsons are embedded in Springfield. Springfield is built around the plant. The plant belongs to Burns. Burns chose Homer. Homer chose to stay. The circle is closed. The loop runs. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace stands in the shadow of the cooling towers, exactly as it always has, and the family inside it does not age, and does not leave, and does not stop loving each other, and does not stop being damaged by the place that contains their love. That is Springfield. That is the environment the show has always been describing. And the comedy it generates is the specific comedy of a beautiful thing existing in conditions that should preclude beauty and finding a way to persist anyway. Section 7. Burns and the Machinery of Control. Charles Montgomery Burns was born in an era when the things he believes are true were, in fact, the operating assumptions of most people with access to significant power. The strong should accumulate. The weak should serve. Sentiment is a liability. Efficiency is the highest value. People are resources to be managed, not persons to be considered. These beliefs have not evolved. They have calcified, across what the show suggests is well over a century of life, into something that exists beyond ideology. Burns does not believe these things in the way that a person with positions believes them. He embodies them. They are the organizing logic of his entire existence, as fundamental to his functioning as the weekly radiation treatments that keep his body from collapsing under the weight of its own diseases. What makes Burns interesting, and the show has always understood this, is not the villainy. The villainy is too complete to be interesting. A man who will do anything for power and has the resources to do it is not a particularly complex figure. What makes Burns interesting is the specific texture of his isolation and the ways in which his absolute control over Springfield has produced a form of absolute loneliness that even he, with all his resources, cannot quite manage away. Burns is alone. This is the show's most consistent and least remarked characterization of him. He lives in a mansion that is architecturally incompatible with comfort. He is surrounded by servants who fear him and sycophants who flatter him, and an assistant who loves him with an intensity that Burns has spent decades choosing not to fully receive. He has accumulated every form of wealth that can be accumulated, and he sits at the center of it in a state of genuine, bone-deep isolation that the comedy surrounding him only partially obscures. The relationship with Smithers is the show's most persistent and most quietly devastating love story. Wayland Smithers has organized his entire life around Charles Burns. Not around the institution of the power plant, not around the abstract idea of Burns as an employer, around Burns specifically, personally, as the object of a devotion so total and so unrequited that it constitutes the defining condition of Smithers's existence. Smithers knows Burns's preferences, his allergies, his medical schedule, his tastes in music and entertainment and food. He knows which of Burns's moods is approaching before Burns himself is aware of it. He manages, with the precision of a dedicated archivist, every detail of Burns's life that Burns cannot or will not manage himself. He does this not because it is his job, though it is his job, but because organizing his life around Burns's life is the closest thing to love that Smithers's specific emotional architecture allows him to express. And Burns does not in any meaningful sense receive this. He appreciates Smithers's competence. He relies on Smithers's management of his affairs. He has, in episodes that are few enough to be treasured, shown something that might be genuine feeling towards Smithers when the prospect of losing him becomes real. But he does not love Smithers. He cannot. Burns's emotional range was narrowed to the point of near disappearance by decades of a life organized entirely around acquisition and control, and love. Genuine responsive love of the kind that Smithers offers requires a kind of vulnerability that Burns has systematically eliminated from himself. The show treats this with an unusual degree of care. It does not play Smithers's love purely for comedy, though it finds comedy in the situation. It allows the situation to be genuinely sad. Smithers is a man of evident intelligence and loyalty and specific, particular feeling who has attached those qualities to someone constitutionally incapable of fully receiving them. This is not unusual in human experience. Most people who have loved unrequitedly or who have loved someone whose emotional limitations prevent them from responding in kind can find something recognizable in Smithers's position. What the show adds to this general human situation is the specific complication of Burns's power. Smithers cannot simply move on. The attachment is too deep, and the practical entanglement is too complete. He manages Burns's life. He is essential to Burns's survival, in the most literal sense. If Smithers left, Burns would miss a medical treatment and die. This is the binding agent of their relationship that nobody discusses. Smithers knows he is keeping Burns alive, and Burns knows Smithers knows this, and neither of them can say it directly because saying it directly would change the nature of their dynamic in ways that neither of them is prepared for. Burns's immortality, the sustained, medically assisted, economically supported continuation of a life that should by every natural measure have ended decades ago, is the show's most concentrated meditation on what unchecked wealth actually produces. It does not produce happiness. Burns is not happy, not in any way the show presents as genuine. It does not produce peace. Burns's inner life, in the episodes that allow access to it, is characterized by vigilance, resentment, and the specific anxiety of a man who has everything to lose because he has everything. It produces more of itself, more wealth, more power, more resources directed at the single goal of maintaining the conditions that allow Burns to keep existing. His entire empire, when you trace its logic, is a life support system. Every dollar he has accumulated, every institution he controls, every politician he has purchased, and every doctor he retains is ultimately in the service of keeping Charles Burns alive for one more week, one more treatment cycle, one more year of continued operation. The show has noted across many episodes that Burns does not enjoy the things his wealth provides. He eats. He does not seem to take pleasure in food. He is surrounded by art and architecture. He does not seem to be moved by beauty. He has outlasted every rival, every friend, every person he was young with, every peer. The longevity that his medical technology provides has not delivered him into an extended experience of a rich human life. It has delivered him into an extended experience of diminishing returns, each decade providing less than the last, with the continuation of the experience becoming its own justification. This is the show's darkest observation about what extreme wealth produces at its logical conclusion. Not the villain version of wealth, not the cartoon evil of a man who builds sun-blocking machines, but the real version. The version in which the accumulation of resources becomes the purpose of existence rather than a means to any other end. In which the man and the machine become indistinguishable from each other, in which the continuation of the life is the reason for the continuation of the life. Burns controls Springfield. This is not hyperbole. The show has established it consistently across its run. The power plant provides the electricity. The economics of the town are organized around the plant's operation. The political structures of Springfield are responsive to Burns's preferences in ways that are sometimes visible and sometimes merely implied. He is the town's primary employer, its primary source of power, its primary economic force, and the invisible organizing principle of its social structure. The residents of Springfield do not, for the most part, think about Burns. He exists at a level above their daily concerns, a figure who is occasionally comic, occasionally menacing, but mostly simply present as a condition of their existence, the way the cooling towers are present, the way the contamination is present. He is the background radiation of their social lives. They are inside his system and cannot see the system from inside it. Homer cannot see it. This is the show's most sustained and most painful joke about the relationship between power and the people subject to it. Homer works for the man who destroyed his family. He earns his paycheck from the man whose grudge against Mona Simpson cost Homer his mother, his potential, and the version of himself that could have existed if the absence had not been there. Homer does not know this, or more precisely, Homer knows it in the way that he knows many things, as information that sits in his consciousness without being connected to action, without producing the kind of synthetic understanding that would change his behavior. The show has given Homer the information, across multiple episodes in explicit form. He knows Burns had his mother exiled. He knows Burns employs him under the terms of a deal struck with his grandfather. He knows that his job security is not earned but transactional, a favor given in exchange for Abe's silence about something Burns did not want investigated. He knows all of this, and he goes to work the next morning because the alternative is not available to him. Not because he is too stupid to understand the implications, because the implications point toward a confrontation with power that nothing in Homer's life has ever equipped him to undertake. This is the show's most precise and least funny observation about how systems of power perpetuate themselves. They do not need their subjects to be unaware. They need their subjects to be unable to act on their awareness. Homer is aware. Homer is simply not free. The awareness sits in him, accumulated across 36 years of episodic revelation, doing nothing, unable to do anything, because the system was designed so that doing nothing was the only option available. Burns built that system. He built it over a century of deliberate, strategic, patient construction. He built the plant, and he built the economic dependency, and he made the deal with Abe, and he exiled Mona, and he hired Homer, and he continues to employ Homer, knowing everything the employment arrangement represents. He is not doing any of this unconsciously. He is the most conscious person in Springfield, operating always with full awareness of the conditions he is managing, the people he is using, and the outcomes he is perpetuating. And he keeps going. He does not change. He cannot change. Charles Burns is his system. Remove the beliefs and the strategies and the century of accumulated decisions in service of power, and there is nothing left to remove. There is no person underneath the machine. The machine is the person. The person is the machine. And the machine will run until the treatments fail and the diseases stop balancing each other and the reactor finally, irrevocably, shuts down. That is Burns. Not a villain in the dramatic sense, because a villain implies choices made differently. Burns is the logical end product of a specific set of conditions applied over a very long period of time. He is what happens when nothing stops the accumulation. He is the town's oldest and most persistent fact, the condition that predates everything else, the background that everything else is organized against. Springfield will outlast everyone who lives in it, except Burns. Burns will outlast Springfield. Section 8. The show's hidden grief, death, loss, and the episodes that shattered the comedy. The Simpsons has killed people. Real deaths. Within the canonical logic of the show, not in the Treehouse of Horror episodes where the deaths are safely contained inside the Halloween frame, not in dreams or fantasies that the show labels as such. Actual deaths that happened to characters the audience had spent time with and learned to care about, and that happened without the safety net of subsequent reversal. The show's relationship with grief is one of its most carefully developed and least discussed qualities. It mourns with a precision that most comedies never approach. And it does so without losing the comedy, without requiring the audience to make a binary choice between feeling and laughing. The grief and the comedy coexist in The Simpsons because the show understood, from its earliest seasons, that they coexist in actual human experience. You laugh at funerals, you cry at comedies. The line between registers is not as clean as genre convention suggests. Bleeding Gums Murphy is the first significant death in the show's canon. He is Lisa's mentor, her connection to the jazz tradition that the saxophone opens up for her, the person who sees and names her talent before anyone else in her life does. He is not a major character in terms of screen time. He appears in a small number of episodes. But his presence in Lisa's life is out of proportion to his screen time because he is the first person outside her family who sees her as a musician rather than as an 8-year-old girl who happens to play an instrument. When he dies, the show does not manage the death with any particular ceremony. He is gone. The fact of the loss is present in Lisa's face and in the quality of silence that surrounds her in the episode's aftermath. The grief is not processed in a way that gives Lisa clear resolution or comfort. She plays. She plays at his memorial because playing is the only language she has that is equal to the size of the feeling, and the music is both a tribute to what he gave her and a testament to the fact that he gave her something that cannot be taken away. The episode is called Round Springfield, and it is structured as a comedy with a grief at its center, which is the most honest architecture available for an episode about losing someone who mattered. Homer buys a defective product and sues for damages. Bart is briefly hospitalized for swallowing a jagged metal piece from a cereal box. The comedy runs alongside the grief without diminishing it. The two things coexist in the same episode the way they coexist in the weeks following an actual loss, when the world keeps doing its normal things around the hole that the loss has made. Maud Flanders is the death that the show has been most questioned about, because her death came with a context that was visible from the outside, the departure of the actress who voiced her, and because the manner of her death was so specifically avoidable, so directly connected to Homer's reflexive selfishness, that the show seemed to be making an argument about consequences that it then did not fully commit to exploring. She is killed by a t-shirt cannon. The specific absurdity of the method is characteristic of the show's gallows sensibility, the way it has always found death in undignified places and treated the undignity as part of the truth rather than a deflection from it. The t-shirts were aimed at Homer, and he moved, and the force that was meant for him found Maud instead. She fell from the bleachers at the Springfield Motor Speedway, and she did not survive. Ned Flanders' grief in the immediate aftermath is the most direct portrayal of acute bereavement that the show had produced to that point. He is a man who has organized his life around his faith and his family, and who now faces the absence of the person around whom the family was built. The comedy Ned generates, the Nedisms, the relentless positivity, the capacity for forgiveness that now has its most severe test, does not disappear immediately. It cannot disappear. It is too deeply conditioned to simply stop. But the show allows the comedy to be inadequate. It allows the grief to exceed the capacity of the performance to contain it. What the show does not do, and what it has been criticized for, is follow the grief to its full conclusion. Ned recovers. He remarries. The hole that Maud left is not exactly filled, but it is eventually covered over by the forward motion of the story, because the story is episodic, and the episodic form demands forward motion. The grief was real. The recovery was also real. The gap between them, the question of whether the recovery was too fast or too neat or too convenient, is the gap between what the show had the formal space to do and what the subject actually required. Frank Grimes is a different kind of death. Not grief, exactly. Something darker and more uncomfortable and less resolvable into a simple feeling. Frank Grimes is a man who worked very hard for everything he achieved and arrived at the Springfield nuclear power plant as a competent, serious professional and encountered Homer Simpson and could not survive the encounter. The episode called Homer's Enemy is the show at its most unflinching about the implications of Homer's existence in a real-world context. Frank Grimes is the real-world intruder, the person who operates by actual rules, who cannot understand how someone like Homer is allowed to continue existing as he does. His outrage at Homer is not comedic. It is the outrage of a person confronting evidence that the universe is not organized around merit or effort or competence. That a man who has never tried, who has repeatedly failed, who has survived disasters that should have ended him, is in possession of a life that Grimes, who tried at everything, does not have. The show refuses to make Homer learn from this. Homer does not understand what Frank Grimes represents. He does not perceive the accusation in Grimes's presence. He experiences Grimes as an irritant, a social awkwardness, a puzzle that he cannot solve. And when Grimes, driven to the edge of reason by the impossibility of Homer's continued existence, kills himself in a final demonstration that Homer's world has its own rules that apply only to Homer, Homer sleeps through the funeral. The show does not condemn Homer for this. It cannot condemn Homer, because condemning Homer would require the show to acknowledge that Grimes was right, and if Grimes was right, then the logic that sustains Homer's existence, the cartoon logic that allows him to fail repeatedly and survive without consequences, is a form of cosmic injustice rather than a charming fictional convention. The show lets Grimes's death be the accusation it is, without defending against it, and then moves on. The question it raised remains in the air, unanswered, which is perhaps the most honest thing the show could do with it. Mona Simpson's death is the most quietly devastating in the show's canon. She returns, in later seasons, after the reconciliation of Season 7, and the show handles her presence carefully, aware of how much she represents to Homer, aware of what her return and eventual permanent loss means for the story the show has always been telling about him. She dies in his presence. Homer is holding her hand. The show gives them a few last minutes together that carry the full weight of the 27 years they were separated, the life Homer lived without her, the person he became in the absence of the person she would have been to him. The scene does not try to resolve any of that. It does not provide the comfort of retrospective understanding. It is simply Homer with his mother at the end of her life, and the size of the loss is present in every frame. Homer's grief in this episode is unlike his grief in any other episode. It is quiet, it is direct, there is no slapstick to manage the feeling, no comic buffer between Homer and the fact of the loss. He cries, and the crying is not played for comedy. The show allows Homer to be fully present in his own grief for once, without the usual protective layer of incompetence or absurdity between the feeling and the audience. It is one of the few times the show fully trusts its own emotional content, trusts that the audience can bear it without the comedy as insulation, and the trust is rewarded. The scene works precisely because of its restraint, because of everything the show does not do around it. The years of build-up, the entire history of Homer and Mona, made the moment available. The show earned it, and then it used it, carefully, without overreach. The pattern across all of these deaths is the same. The show understands grief as something that happens in the middle of other things. That does not wait for an appropriate moment. That exists simultaneously with the comedy of daily life, because daily life does not pause for grief to run its course. The deaths in The Simpsons are handled with this understanding operating throughout. They are not climactic in the conventional sense. They do not produce the cathartic resolution that conventional dramatic grief requires. They produce something more honest and more diffuse. A quality of loss that persists, that runs underneath subsequent episodes, that has changed the story without announcing the change. This is what grief actually does. It does not end. It changes shape. It becomes the background of other things rather than the foreground of its own thing. And The Simpsons, in its episodic, floating timeline, reset after reset structure, is accidentally the most realistic depiction of this aspect of grief that television has produced. The deaths stay, the characters go on. The loss is present and not present simultaneously, which is exactly how it works. Section 9. Secondary characters as mirrors. What Springfield's background tells us. Every town is its atmosphere, as much as its center. Springfield has a center, the Simpson family at 742 Evergreen Terrace, but its atmosphere is what makes it specific. And the atmosphere of Springfield is generated by the secondary characters, the people who populate the background of every scene, who recur across seasons with their own fixed qualities and their own histories, who are not the main story but without whom there would be no main story. They are the texture of the place. They are Springfield. Ned Flanders has already been introduced in this video as the show's most complete portrait of goodness gone systematically unrewarded. But the specific quality of his existence in relation to Homer's is worth examining more carefully because the show has organized their neighborly relationship as a kind of moral argument that it never quite makes explicit. Ned does everything right. This is not a simplification. The show's characterization of Ned is a serious attempt to depict a person who has genuinely organized his life around values he holds sincerely and practices consistently. He is generous with his time. He is patient with his children. He maintains his property and contributes to his community and supports the institutions that hold his social world together. He is, by any externally applied metric, a substantially better person than his neighbor, and his neighbor's life is substantially better than his. Homer has a marriage that persists. Homer has children who are, in their complicated ways, finding their paths. Homer has a job he can neither perform adequately nor be fired from. Homer has, in the specific cartoon logic of his existence, an immunity to consequences that Ned has been watching from next door for 36 years without being able to explain. The show's theological undertow is most visible in Ned's situation. If goodness is not rewarded and mediocrity is not punished, if the universe does not organize itself according to the moral logic that Ned's faith implies it should, what does that mean for the faith? The show does not answer this directly. It places the question in Ned's expression as he watches Homer walk away from another disaster unchanged. It lets the question sit in the air between their two houses. Unresolved, persistent, the most honest thing the show has ever said about the relationship between virtue and outcome. The conditioning is the key to Ned that changes everything else. The revelation that his apparent goodness is the result of childhood behavioral modification, that the rage was beaten out of him by a therapy that did not distinguish between harmful anger and healthy assertion, means that everything about Ned needs to be reread. His patience is not natural. It is the product of a specific intervention. His forgiveness is not grace freely given. It is the programmed response of a brain that was restructured to prevent the feeling that would otherwise generate a different response. This does not make Ned's goodness less real. The goodness is real, the kindness is real, the faith is sincerely held and sincerely practiced, but it complicates the goodness. It makes it something harder and more ambiguous than simple virtue. Because the person underneath the conditioning, the Ned who would exist without the behavioral modification, is someone the show has only glimpsed in the moments when the conditioning breaks down. And that person is not the Ned that Springfield knows. That person is carrying 36 years of accumulated injury and unprocessed anger and the specific grief of a man whose wife was killed by his neighbor's carelessness and who was not allowed to feel the full weight of that. Grief? Sideshow Bob is Springfield's most tragic figure of wasted potential, which in a town full of wasted potential is a significant distinction. Bob has the intelligence, the cultural sophistication, and the theatrical sensibility to have been genuinely extraordinary at almost anything he chose to pursue. He is erudite, classically trained, broadly educated, and possessed of a verbal facility that is unmatched by any other character in the show's universe. He is the most capable person in Springfield who is not Charles Burns. He has devoted all of this to killing Bart Simpson. The obsession with Bart is the show's most sustained analysis of what can happen when enormous intelligence is married to wounded ego and given a single organizing purpose. Bob lost something to Bart, not a material thing, but a psychological thing. The role of the competent, respected professional, the entertainer who is taken seriously, the person who is seen for what he actually is, rather than what his situation has made him. Bart's exposure of him, years ago, cost him the public self he had constructed, and he has been unable to build a new one because the wound is too deep and the ego too fragile to absorb the rebuilding. So he keeps trying to kill Bart. Episode after episode, across decades, he keeps constructing elaborate schemes that Bart keeps surviving, and the schemes keep failing, and the failure keeps feeding the wound, and the wound keeps generating new schemes. It is a perfect closed loop of obsessive futility, and it is funny, but it is also a portrait of what intelligence looks like when it is not employed in service of anything constructive. When it is directed entirely inward, toward the management of a humiliation that has become the organizing purpose of an existence. Krusty the Clown is the show's most direct portrait of a specific kind of show business pathology. The gap between the private self and the professional mask in Krusty is so wide that the two seem to have lost all contact with each other. Krusty is depressed, chemically dependent, financially irresponsible, and morally compromised in ways that the show documents across decades with the relentlessness of a case study. He is a man who became his mask because the mask was more successful than the person underneath it, and the success of the mask made the person less and less viable over time. The father relationship is the emotional root of Krusty's situation. The rabbi who rejected his son's desire to be a clown, who saw entertainment as beneath the dignity of their lineage, who wanted from Krusty something that Krusty was constitutionally unable to provide, set in motion the specific self-destruction that the show has cataloged across its run. Krusty became the mask to spite the father and to prove the father wrong. And in becoming the mask, he lost access to the person who would have been able to have a relationship with the father after the proving was done. The episode where Krusty and his father reconcile is one of the show's most specific portraits of a particular kind of Jewish-American family dynamic, handled with a care and specificity that the show brings to ethnic and cultural material at its best. The reconciliation does not resolve Krusty's pathologies. The mask does not come off. But there is a moment in which the father sees his son, actually sees him, behind the grease paint and the professional persona and the decades of managed distance, and the seeing matters even though nothing around it changes. Chief Wiggum is the show's sustained joke about institutional failure, and the joke works because it is built on a genuinely observed truth. Ralph's father, the chief of police of Springfield, is not a malicious figure. He is not corrupt in the calculating way that would make him a villain. He is simply insufficient. He is inadequate to the demands of the role he occupies. Not because he is evil, but because the institution that put him there does not have sufficiency as a selection criterion. Ralph Wiggum, his son, has inherited a quality of presence in the world that is unique in the show and possibly in American television. Ralph's relationship with reality is loose and generous, his statements approaching the surreal from a direction that is neither stupid nor knowing, but genuinely its own thing. The show uses Ralph as a comic device, which he is, but also as a kind of moral clarity device. Ralph says things that are technically non sequiturs, but that periodically, accidentally, cut directly to the truth of a situation in ways that the more sophisticated characters cannot manage. The relationship between the children of Springfield and the world that their parents have built is present across all of these secondary characters and their families. The children did not choose the contamination, or the institutional failures, or the economic conditions, or the moral compromises. They were born into Springfield and they are making their way through it, with the tools their parents gave them, which were often insufficient, and the resilience their circumstances required them to develop, which was considerable. The background of Springfield is not background. It is the story of a town and a generation inheriting the consequences of choices they had no part in making. Apu Nahasapi Mapetalon is a figure the show constructed from a specific time and place, and specific assumptions about what would be funny to a specific audience, and the show's relationship with that construction has become one of the most debated aspects of its legacy. Apu is the immigrant entrepreneur, the man who owns the Quick E-Mart and works its counter for hours that no labor law was designed to accommodate, whose name and accent and cultural signifiers were filtered through a comic frame that the show applied without the kind of care it brought to other aspects of its characterization. The Simpsons has not resolved this satisfactorily in the estimation of the communities most affected by it, and the show's attempts at addressing it in later seasons have been widely understood as insufficient. What is worth noting, in the context of the larger argument this video is making, is that Apu's situation, even within the comic frame that distorts it, is legible as a portrait of specific economic precarity. He owns his business but does not quite control it. He works inhuman hours. He is embedded in Springfield's economy in ways that tie him to the town, even when the town provides him with insufficient returns. He has made his peace with conditions that are below what he might reasonably have expected, and he has made this peace through the particular form of stoic acceptance that immigration to a country that was not designed for your full humanity sometimes requires. The specific texture of the secondary characters, taken together, produces a portrait of Springfield as a place where almost everyone is operating with less than they need. Less money, less power, less information, less time, less recognition. The town's background is populated by people who are doing their best in conditions of persistent insufficiency, finding their pleasures and their communities and their meanings in the space the conditions allow. This is not presented as tragedy. The show finds comedy in it, genuine comedy, because the comedy of the gap between what people need and what they have is one of the oldest and most reliable sources of humor available. But the comedy is always organized around something true. The truth that Springfield is a town of constrained lives. That the constraints are not random but structural. That the structure was built by someone, maintained by someone, and serves someone's interests. And that the people in the background of every scene, the ones who are not the Simpsons, are also people with full lives and genuine needs and the same capacity for love and damage and endurance that the family at the center of the story demonstrates. Springfield is full of people. They are all in their own ways trying. The show has never stopped knowing this. Section 10. The show's relationship with religion, faith, and the divine. God appears in The Simpsons. Not as a background reference, not as a figure invoked in prayer and unresponsive, but as an actual character who speaks, who has a face, who has conversations with Homer Simpson about the nature of the universe and the specific trajectory of Homer's life. This is strange. It is strange in a way that the show has never quite fully acknowledged, because the strangeness is so thoroughly integrated into the fabric of the series that it functions as a settled premise rather than an extraordinary claim. God exists. He talks to Homer. He is real and responsive and occasionally fallible and seems, in the episodes where he appears, to have something like a genuine investment in Homer's situation. And he has never spoken directly to Ned Flanders. The theological implications of this distribution of divine attention are the show's most persistently unaddressed subtext. Ned Flanders has organized his entire life around his faith. He attends church, he reads scripture, he raises his children in a home where God is not a Sunday obligation but a daily presence, a genuine interlocutor in the decisions and anxieties of daily life. He prays with apparent sincerity. He speaks of God's plan with a conviction that the show never quite mocks, even in its most irreverent moments. Ned believes, deeply and consistently, and the belief is portrayed as genuine rather than performative. Homer does not believe in the same way. Homer's relationship with religion is the relationship of a man who is told to go to church as a child and who defaults to certain rituals of faith not from conviction but from the gravity of custom. He attends when Marge insists. He prays when the situation seems to require it, with the specific desperation of a man bargaining rather than communing. He is not, by any conventional measure, a person of faith. And God speaks to Homer. The episode Homer the Heretic is the one that frames this most directly. Homer decides one Sunday to stay home from church, and in the warmth and freedom of a morning alone in his house, he has what can only be described as an authentic spiritual experience. He is comfortable, present, unhurried. He makes his own breakfast. He watches television without the usual guilt. He dances. He falls asleep on the couch and has a dream in which God appears and they have an actual conversation, the kind of conversation that Ned Flanders has been trying to have with God through prayer for his entire life. God in this dream is warm and sensible and not particularly impressed with formal religious observance. He speaks to Homer as an equal, or near equal, without the formal hierarchy that religious tradition suggests should structure the relationship between the divine and the human. He is interested in Homer. He has things to say that are specific to Homer's situation. He is present in a way that Ned's entire life of faith has not been able to produce. The show does not make an argument from this. It does not construct a theology that says formal religious practice is inferior to informal spiritual openness. But it shows you the distribution. The person who prays receives silence. The person who stays home and makes his own pancakes receives a visit. In subsequent episodes, God appears more directly, fully embodied, responsive, having ongoing interactions with Homer that are treated as unremarkable by the narrative. Homer met God. He knows what God looks like. He has been given specific information about the nature of the universe. And this has not changed anything about his life or his behavior, because Homer is constitutionally unable to integrate information in ways that change his behavior. He meets God and then he goes back to the power plant. Ned watches this from next door and continues praying into the silence. The show's relationship with organized religion is more complex than its comedy about church would suggest. Reverend Lovejoy is the formal representative of institutional religion in Springfield, and he is a figure of comfortable mediocrity. He has been delivering sermons to the same congregation for the same length of time that every other fixture of Springfield has been in place, and the sermons have the quality of content that comes from someone who went through the motions of preparation without much investment in the outcome. His faith, to the extent it is visible, seems to have been metabolized into professional routine. He believes, presumably, but the believing has been incorporated so completely into the furniture of his daily life that it no longer produces heat. This is not the show condemning religion. It is the show making an observation that anyone who has spent time in a congregation would recognize. That institution tends to metabolize conviction into routine. That the formal structures of organized religion can simultaneously maintain and insulate the community from the actual experience that the structures were originally built to facilitate. Lovejoy is not a bad man. He is a man whose vocation has become a job, and the difference between vocation and job is the difference between Ned Flanders's faith and Reverend Lovejoy's practice. The show's most honest statement about faith might be the one it makes through Lisa. Lisa's engagement with spirituality across the series is the most serious and sustained of any characters. She has moved through different traditions, explored different frameworks, asked the questions that her intelligence requires her to ask, and arrived nowhere in particular. Not at atheism, because the show has been explicit that God exists in its universe and Lisa knows this. And not at the kind of settled faith that Ned has, because settled faith requires a capacity for not questioning that Lisa's mind is not equipped to maintain. Lisa is in the position of a person who knows the divine is real and cannot stop investigating it. She has the information that should produce faith. God is real. The universe has some kind of organizing principle. These are established within the show's canon, and she cannot rest in the information because she knows too much about the complexity of what follows from it. She is the show's most honest portrait of what contemporary religious uncertainty actually feels like. Not the absence of belief, but the inability to stop interrogating it. The Springfield Church, physical and institutional, is a comfort. This is also something the show takes seriously. The congregation that gathers there is not gathering in irony. They are gathering because the gathering matters, because the ritual matters, because there is something in the specific practice of coming together around a shared acknowledgement that something exists beyond the immediate and the measurable that human beings need, at a level that cannot be addressed by other means. The comedy about the church, and there is considerable comedy, is comedy about the institution rather than the impulse. The impulse is treated with respect. The gap between the impulse and the institution it has created is where the jokes live. And that gap between what faith reaches for and what religion has built is a gap that the show suggests is real and permanent and navigable but not closable. Springfield goes to church. Springfield is not saved by it. The going matters anyway. God talks to Homer. Ned prays in silence. The church offers comfort without answers. Lisa investigates without arriving. And somewhere in the middle of all this, the show suggests, is the actual human experience of the divine, which is not certainty in either direction, but the persistent, irreducible sense that there is something more than what is immediately visible, combined with the equally persistent, irreducible uncertainty about what that something is or what it wants from us. Section 11. The Marriages of Springfield. Love under impossible conditions. Homer and Marge have almost ended their marriage approximately 30 times across the show's run. This is not a figure derived from any official count. It is a conservative estimate based on the number of episodes in which the structural integrity of their relationship is the central dramatic concern, in which the possibility of permanent separation is raised and sustained and only resolved in the final act. The Marriages of Springfield, plural, because the show has populated its world with enough couples to make marriage a genuine theme rather than a single relationship study, are organized around a specific tension that the show has been exploring since its earliest seasons. What keeps two people together when the conditions of their life together are sufficiently difficult that staying is a genuine daily decision rather than a default? Homer and Marge's marriage is the primary case study. The secondary ones, Ned and Maude. Ned and his subsequent relationships. The handful of other Springfield couples who appear often enough to be characterized provide variations on the theme. But Homer and Marge are the text that every secondary couple is a commentary on. The foundation of their marriage is strange and specific and not easily categorized. It is not, despite the show's repeated emotional gestures toward this reading, primarily a romantic love in the conventional sense. There are romantic elements, and the show has moments of genuine tenderness between them that operate in a genuinely romantic register. But the thing that holds them together across 36 seasons of continuous, near dissolution is something older and more structural than romance. They are the people their life made together. They have been making their shared life since high school, in the flashback episodes that rewrite the timeline forward with each retelling. Whatever version of the origin story the show is currently maintaining, the consistency is that Homer and Marge met young and built something together that now extends far beyond either of them as individuals. They share children, they share a history, they share the specific knowledge of each other that only comes from decades of proximity to another person's most private self. They share the house and the debt and the neighborhood and the accumulated experience of surviving everything that Springfield has done to them together. This kind of marriage, the kind built out of shared history and mutual dependency, and the specific gravity of having made a life together rather than simply having fallen in love, is not frequently depicted on television with honesty. Television tends to prefer the romantic version, the story of people who are together because they cannot imagine being otherwise, whose love is defined by its intensity and its exclusivity and its constant renewal. Homer and Marge's marriage is not this. Their love is defined by its persistence, by its capacity to absorb damage, by the specific refusal to end that both of them maintain, not always for clean or noble reasons, but consistently, even when the reasons are as simple as the habit of the other person in the bed. The show has pushed this marriage to genuinely dark places across its run. The episode where Marge develops feelings for another man, the bowling instructor whose attention and physical competence represent everything Homer is not, is handled with more honesty about female desire and marital vulnerability than almost anything else on network television from that era. The show does not judge Marge for wanting something different. It does not construct the other man as a villain to justify Marge's return to Homer. It shows the desire as real and the reasons for it as legitimate, and the ultimate decision to stay as something more complicated than the easy victory of true love over temptation. Marge goes back to Homer because Homer loves her in a way that the other man does not better necessarily, but with the specific, messy, unreserved love of someone who has no strategy and no performance and no version of himself that is managed for her benefit. What Homer offers Marge is the complete, unedited version of a human being who is devoted to her, and this turns out to matter more than the more polished alternatives the show has proposed. Homer's almost infidelities follow a similar logic. The show has given Homer attractive women who are interested in him on multiple occasions, and each time has followed the same pattern. The interest is real. The temptation is real. The failure of the near affair is always the result of Homer's specific incapacity to be unfaithful rather than any strategic or moral decision. He loves Marge too much and too simply to successfully maintain the kind of compartmentalization that sustained infidelity requires. He is saved from it not by virtue, but by the architectural fact that his love for Marge occupies the same cognitive space as everything else important to him, and there is not room for something that would require its displacement. The fights between Homer and Marge are the show's most consistent source of comedy and its most consistent source of something that is not comedy. The pattern of a fight is reliable enough that the show has codified it into something close to a ritual. Homer does something that violates Marge's sense of what the marriage should be. Marge expresses her disappointment in the specific register of patient exasperation that is her default mode of complaint. Homer fails to understand the significance of her response. The failure to understand is itself a further violation. The temperature rises, someone leaves or is asked to leave. The episode's middle section processes the separation. They find their way back. What the show does not often show is what the fight costs. The return to normal is the resolution the narrative requires, and the show provides it. But the cost of the fight, the specific damage that accumulates in a marriage where the same patterns repeat, is rarely accounted for in the episodic arithmetic. The floating timeline that prevents aging also prevents accumulation. Marge absorbs the same disappointments in the same proportions in the same marriage for 36 years. And the show suggests, in its most honest episodes, that this is not simply the comedy of a mismatched couple. It is the sustained, structural challenge of a marriage between two people whose needs are genuinely, deeply asymmetric. Homer needs Marge to be patient, available, forgiving, steady. He needs the home base that she represents. He needs the assurance, renewed constantly through her continued presence, that he is not going to be left. These needs are real and they are enormous, and they are, in their accumulated daily expression, very demanding of the person required to meet them. Marge needs to be seen, to be valued for the specific person she is rather than the role she performs, to have the interior life that she maintains, largely in private, occasionally acknowledged as significant, to have a partner who can sometimes match her attentiveness, who can meet her where she is rather than always requiring her to come to him. These needs are also real, and they are also substantial, and they are, in the structure of this particular marriage, met inconsistently. The miracle of Homer and Marge's marriage, the thing the show has been exploring without quite naming, is that these two sets of asymmetric needs have found a way to coexist, not by being resolved, not by Homer becoming more attentive or Marge becoming less needful of being seen, by the two of them finding, across decades of practice, a rhythm that accommodates the asymmetry, a way of being together that is not perfect, but that is, for them, theirs. This is the show's most radical statement about love, that it does not require compatibility, that it does not require the resolution of fundamental differences, that it requires only the continued daily decision to remain, to keep building despite the difficulty, to find in the specific person who is there the specific thing that is enough, not everything, enough. The Springfieldian marriages around them illuminate this by contrast. Ned and Maude had the kind of marriage that the cultural ideal celebrates: shared values, genuine mutual respect, a common vision for their family's life. And Maude was killed by a t-shirt cannon at a NASCAR event because Homer moved out of the way. The perfect marriage ended not because of any failure in it, but because the environment around it was not designed to protect what it had built. This is the show's most explicit statement about the relationship between love and circumstance. You can do everything right in a marriage, and the world can still take it from you. You can be Ned Flanders, devoted and faithful and genuinely good, and the thing you have built can be destroyed by forces that have nothing to do with you. The quality of the love does not protect it from the quality of the environment it exists in. Homer and Marge's marriage survives not because it is the best marriage Springfield contains, but because the conditions that destroy marriages have, through some combination of luck and stubbornness and the specific cartoon resilience that the show grants its central family, not yet destroyed this one. The show cannot promise it will survive. It can only show it surviving, episode after episode, year after year, in the grinding, daily, imperfect, beautiful way that real marriages survive. That is the love story the show has always been telling, not the romantic version, the realistic version. The version in which two people stay together not because they are perfect for each other, but because they have chosen each other, over and over, in conditions that make every choice difficult, and the choosing has made them who they are. Section 12. Why the show could never end, and what that says about us. There is a question that sits underneath everything we have discussed tonight, and it is the one that the show itself has never quite been able to answer. Why does The Simpsons still exist? Not as a production question. The production question has a simple answer. The show makes money. It has always made money. It will continue to make money for as long as the audiences that grew up with it are alive to feel the specific pull of its presence on their screens. The economics of The Simpsons are not mysterious. The question is different from that. Why do we need it to continue? Why does the existence of the show, even a diminished version of the show, even a version that most of its original fans have not been following actively for years, feel important to us in a way that is not purely nostalgic? Why does knowing it is still there matter, even if we are not watching? The answer is connected to everything the show has been doing with its characters across 36 years. The Simpsons is the longest-running portrait of an American family in the history of the medium. It has been depicting domestic life in its specific yellow-skinned, four-fingered, Springfield-flavored form for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. The family at 742 Evergreen Terrace has been there, consistently, continuously, through every major shift in American culture, every economic upheaval, every political realignment, every technology that has transformed daily life. They have been there with their particular problems and their particular love and their particular way of failing each other and coming back together. They have not changed. That is the thing. The show has not allowed them to change, and we have not asked it to. The floating timeline is a production decision and a narrative convenience, but it is also a response to a real cultural demand. We do not want The Simpsons to age. We do not want Bart to turn 11. We do not want to watch Lisa move away or Marge redecorate or Homer retire. The specific configuration of that family, on that couch, in that house, is the configuration we need it to maintain, and the show has maintained it for 36 years in response to that need. This says something about us, something that the show in its most honest moments has been pointing toward throughout its run. We are a culture that is afraid of the ending, that time always eventually delivers. Afraid of the passage that makes the familiar unfamiliar. Afraid of the moment when the version of things we have loved becomes unreachable, not because it has been taken from us, but simply because time has moved past it, and we have not. The Simpsons was always a show about a family that was going to be okay, not a show that promised its characters success or happiness or the resolution of their fundamental wounds, but a show that promised they would be there, that Homer would keep falling and getting up, that Marge would keep holding things together, that Bart would keep running, and Lisa would keep playing, and Maggie would keep watching with those enormous eyes, that the house at 742 Evergreen Terrace would be there with the lights on when we needed it. This promise has been kept for 36 years. It is, in some ways, the most significant promise American popular culture has made in the last quarter century and kept consistently. We trusted the show to not end, and the show has not ended, and the trust and the keeping of the trust have created something between the show and its audience that goes beyond ordinary fandom. Something that is closer to the relationship between people and the places they grew up in. A specific, inarticulate comfort in the continued existence of something that has always been there. The floating timeline is the mechanism of this promise. Because the Simpsons do not age, they cannot be lost to time in the way that all real things are eventually lost. They exist outside the progression that makes everything else eventually become the past. They are permanent present tense. They are always happening. They are never happening for the last time. There is always another episode. There is always another Sunday night. There is always the couch, the television, the family assembled in the specific formation that we have memorized as thoroughly as we have memorized our own homes. The show has imagined its own ending in the flash-forward episodes that show the characters as adults, as old people, as figures in a future that the floating timeline will never actually allow the show to reach. These futures are beautiful and sad and carry the specific weight of imagined goodbyes. Lisa at 23, finding her life outside Springfield. Homer and Marge in old age, still together, the marriage having outlasted every near dissolution and every almost ending. Bart, finally an adult, finally out of the 4th grade, finally becoming the person the show always suggested was inside him somewhere. These episodes feel like the show paying its respects to a future it has decided not to pursue. Like a person visiting a place they have chosen not to move to, spending an afternoon in the version of their life they did not choose, before returning to the version they did. The Simpsons visits its futures and comes back. Every time. Because coming back is the promise. The show's relationship with its own quality is also worth addressing, because it is part of the conversation about what the show is and what it has become. The golden years of The Simpsons, the periods roughly corresponding to the 2nd through 8th or 9th seasons, produced some of the finest writing in the history of American comedy. Dense, layered, emotionally honest, formally inventive writing that operated on multiple registers simultaneously in ways that have influenced virtually every comedy writer who came after it. The later seasons are not the same as those seasons. Most observers who have followed the show across its run would agree with this. And the debate about when exactly the quality shifted and why it shifted is a long-standing conversation in the show's fan community. What is less often discussed is what the diminished quality of later seasons means in the context of the larger story the show has been telling. If the show's best seasons were the ones in which its emotional honesty was most fully expressed, in which the wounds of the characters were most directly visible, in which the comedy was most thoroughly built on a foundation of genuine human truth, then the shift in quality might be understood as a shift in that relationship. The later seasons are funnier in a more surface sense and less honest in a deeper sense. The comedy is there. The truth underneath the comedy is more intermittent. This might be what happens when a show runs long enough to outlive the emotional urgency that gave it its original power. The Simpsons in its peak years was made by people who had something specific they needed to say, and who had found in this specific cartoon format an unexpected vehicle for saying it. The show emerged from a generation's particular relationship with the American family, the suburbs, the economic anxieties of the 1980s and early 1990s, and it processed all of that material with a precision that came from proximity. The writers were writing about things they knew from the inside. As the show has continued, and the original writers have moved on, and the cultural distance between the show and its source material has grown, the specific urgency has dissipated. The show continues to be technically accomplished. It continues to be funny. But the quality of feeling underneath it, the thing that made the best seasons genuinely moving, is present less reliably. This does not change what the show is. It does not invalidate the archive. The 36 seasons of The Simpsons, taken as a whole, constitute an extraordinary document of American domestic life, an archive of observation about what it is to be a specific kind of family, in a specific kind of town, in a specific kind of country, across a period of significant change. The later seasons are part of that document. They show what happens to a family story when the story runs past the urgency that created it, and that showing is its own kind of truth. The question that the show has been quietly asking for the last decade or more, in the background of its episodic business, is whether the continuing matters. Whether a show that has outlived its original urgency still serves the purpose the urgency was serving. Whether the comfort of its continued existence is sufficient justification for the continuation, even when the comfort is the show's only remaining product, the audience has answered this question consistently. The show continues because the audience continues to watch. Not in the numbers of the peak years, but in numbers sufficient to justify the continuation by any standard the network applies. And the audience continues to watch not only because the show is still funny, but because the show being there, still running, still available, still making new episodes, is itself the thing the show has always provided. The comfort is the point. The continued existence of the family on the couch is the product. The Simpsons are still there. They are still on. You can go back to them whenever you need them. Homer is still falling down the same stairs. Marge is still sighing in the kitchen. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. The loop is still running. And somewhere in Springfield, in a house that does not age, on a street that does not change, under cooling towers that do not stop, the most imperfect family in the history of American television is still, quietly, stubbornly, inexplicably, together. We built this loop. We pressed pause in 1989 and handed the remote to the show and asked it never to press play. The show has honored that request for 36 years. It has kept the family in amber, preserved against the passage that takes everything else, suspended in the permanent present of a story that has no last episode. And we return to it, in the dark, when the day is done and the house is quiet, and we need the specific comfort of something that was there when we were young and is still there now. The Simpsons never ends because we never let it. And we never let it because ending it would mean admitting that the world it depicts, that particular version of the American family, that specific dream of belonging and persistence and love that survives its own damage, was always temporary, was always going to be overtaken by time, was always going to become the past. As long as the show runs, the past is the present. As long as the loop holds, the family is intact. As long as Homer stumbles through the door at 5:30, and Bart is at the table, and Lisa is at her desk, and Marge is in the kitchen, and Maggie is in her high chair, we are in a world where the family did not fall apart, where the love was enough, where the house held. We are in Springfield. And Springfield, as the show has always known, is everywhere. Section 13. The couch gag and the grammar of return. The couch gag is the most overlooked formal element in The Simpsons, which is strange because it is also the most formally interesting. It appears in every episode, in the same position, performing the same basic function, and yet it changes every time. The family runs toward the couch. Something different happens. They arrive on the couch, or they do not arrive on the couch, or the couch is something other than a couch, or the sequence of their arrival is disrupted in some way that makes visible, briefly, the mechanism that normally operates invisibly. The couch gag is the show's most direct acknowledgement that it has a form, that the form is a choice, that the same information, the family running toward the same couch in the same house, can be delivered in an infinite number of ways without changing the essential content. The couch gag says, every week, we are telling the same story again, and we can tell it any way we like, and we have chosen, today, to tell it like this. This is not trivial. Most television shows do not have an element that foregrounds their own formal conventions in this way. Most shows that have opening titles and theme songs and recurring visual signatures treat those elements as transparent delivery mechanisms for the actual show. The couch gag is different because it makes the delivery mechanism the content. For 30 seconds every episode, the show is not pretending that the conventions are invisible. It is playing with them. It is showing you the convention and the variation simultaneously, making both things visible at once. What the couch gag has accumulated across 36 seasons is something like a grammar of return. Each variation on the theme is a sentence in that grammar, saying something slightly different with the same vocabulary. Some sentences are simple, some are complex, some are single words, some run long enough to be essays, but they all come from the same vocabulary: the family, the run, the living room, the couch, and they all perform the same function. They bring everyone back. They reassemble the family. They locate the episode in the specific geography of the show's world. The family always makes it to the couch. Or if they do not make it to the couch, the gag is about the not making it, which is the same thing. The couch is the destination. The couch is home. The couch is where the story begins, every time, regardless of where the previous episode ended. The couch gag is the show's recurring promise that no matter what happened last week, no matter how far the plot traveled, no matter how severely the episode's story tested the family's coherence, they are assembled again. They are here. They made it. This promise, renewed every week in a sequence that lasts 30 seconds, is the formal expression of everything the show is emotionally. The family gets back to the couch. They always get back to the couch. The variation is in how, not whether. And the whether, the fact of the arrival, the reassembly, the restored configuration of 5 people in their specific positions, is the thing the show has been protecting all along. The couch is Springfield's answer to the floating timeline. If the timeline is the show's acknowledgement that change is impossible in this world, the couch gag is the show's celebration of that impossibility. Yes, nothing changes. Yes, we are telling the same story again. And look, here we are. We found a new way to tell it. The inability to progress is also the freedom to return. The loop is also a form of abundance. Every week, a new couch gag. Every week, a new way home. The show understands this. It has always understood this. The formal playfulness of the couch gag is not separable from the emotional honesty of everything else. They are the same intelligence, expressed in different registers. The couch gag is the show being smart about being itself. About being a loop. About being a family story that returns to the same place every week and finds, in the returning, something worth celebrating. Section 14. The specific comfort of Springfield at night. There is a quality that the show has at a specific time of day, and that time of day is now. Whatever time now is for you, whether it is late enough that the house is quiet or early enough that the world has not yet started, there is a version of watching The Simpsons that is different from watching it in a full room with other people or in the afternoon while doing something else. There is the version that happens in the dark, in the quiet, when the episode is company rather than entertainment. This is the version that this video is designed for. The version where the voices of Springfield are not demanding your attention, but simply filling the silence. Where Homer's disasters and Marge's sighs and Lisa's saxophone and Bart's quick dismissals of everything he secretly cares about are the ambient sound of a world that has been continuous and comforting for longer than you can really calculate. The show has a specific warmth at this hour. It is not the high-energy warmth of its peak comedy moments, not the specific pleasure of a perfect joke delivered at perfect speed. It is the warmer, slower warmth of a familiar presence, of something that has always been there when you came back to it, of a family that you know well enough that the uncertainty of their situations, which you have spent time examining tonight, does not prevent them from being soothing in aggregate. Homer is falling asleep on the couch. Marge is standing at the kitchen window with a glass of water. Bart has finally run out of energy. Lisa has put the saxophone down. Maggie is in her crib watching the ceiling with the patient attention she brings to everything. The house is quiet, the town is quiet. Springfield is doing what it does when nobody is watching closely. Being itself. Being continuous. Being the same place it has always been. The cooling towers are visible from certain windows, their red warning lights blinking slowly in the dark. The river runs past them, in the direction it has always run. The school is empty. Moe's is closed. The nuclear plant hums with the specific sound of a facility that never fully stops. The streets of Springfield at night have the quality of a town that has said everything it needed to say for the day and is simply resting now, sustaining itself through the quiet hours, waiting for morning. The Simpsons at night, in the dark, watched quietly at whatever time you are watching, is the show's most honest form. Without the social energy of a room full of people, without the distractions of a busy day, the show becomes what it has always been under the comedy. A family story, a love story, a story about people doing their imperfect best in conditions that were not designed to help them flourish, and finding in each other something worth the difficulty. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace does not change. The people inside it do not age. The street is the same, the town is the same. The show has been keeping all of it in place for 36 years, pressing pause in 1989 and keeping it pressed, and tonight you are watching the thing the pause has preserved. A family that stays together. A love that survives its own damage. A house where the lights are on, that is Springfield, that is the show. And that is enough to fall asleep to. Section 15. What the saxophone means. There is a sound that appears throughout the show that is never fully explained and never needs to be. The sound of Lisa's saxophone, played alone in her room, filtering through the closed door, audible in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the rest of the house where her family is doing their normal things. The saxophone is not incidental. It is not background scoring. It is a character element that the show treats with the same care it brings to dialogue, placing it in scenes where it performs work that words cannot. The saxophone is Lisa's speaking voice when her words are inadequate. When the emotion exceeds what language offers her, when the family is too noisy or too inattentive or too committed to their own concerns to receive what she is trying to communicate, she plays. The specific quality of the saxophone, its warmth, its capacity for expression that sits between the human voice and the abstract, its ability to be melancholy without being tragic, is perfectly suited to Lisa's situation. She is a child who carries more than a child should carry, who understands more than her age should allow, who is isolated by the very intelligence that makes her remarkable. The saxophone gives all of that somewhere to go. It gives the weight of her awareness a form that can exist in the world without requiring anyone to understand it. She does not need you to receive the saxophone the way she would need you to receive a speech. The saxophone is enough by itself. The moments when the saxophone is audible from outside Lisa's room, filtering through the house while the family goes about its business, are the show's most precise depiction of what Lisa's life in this family actually feels like. She is present. She is making herself heard in the only language available to her. And the family is going about its business, not from indifference, from the simple fact that they are operating in a different register, responding to different needs, and the saxophone is not a communication they know how to receive even when they can hear it. There is an episode in which Homer hears Lisa playing and stops. He stands in the hallway outside her door and he listens. And the listening is the episode's emotional center, not a speech about how he understands her now, not a reconciliation or a resolution. He stands in the hallway and he hears her, fully, for a moment, before the episode's business calls him back. And for that moment, the saxophone and the listening are enough. They are the whole thing. The connection is there, imperfect and brief and real. And then it is not there anymore, but it was there. That moment is what The Simpsons has always been building toward. The moment of actual contact between people who love each other and spend most of their time narrowly missing each other. The moment when the saxophone goes through the closed door and into the hallway and into Homer's ear and Homer stands still and receives it. Not for long, not permanently, but for the length of a moment, which is all a moment ever lasts. The show has been placing those moments throughout its run, in the interstices of the comedy, waiting for someone to notice them. They are there. They have always been there. In the space between the jokes, in the quiet after the punchline, in the hallway outside a closed door where a saxophone is playing and a man is standing still, listening. That is the show. That is what it has always been. Fall asleep to it. Section 16. The Long View from Evergreen Terrace. 36 years is a long time to tell the same story. Longer than most human lifespans in the era the show depicts, longer than most institutions survive in their original form, longer than virtually any other story in the history of American television has sustained itself with the same central cast and the same central premise and the same central house. The Long View from Evergreen Terrace reveals something that the episode-by-episode view obscures. The Simpsons is not a series of stories. It is a single story, told in fragments, across an impossibly extended duration, that coheres into something larger than any of its parts. The fragments are the episodes. The story is the family. And the family's story, when you stand back far enough to see it whole, is a story about what it means to be alive in a specific place at a specific time with specific people who you did not choose but have chosen every day to stay with. The characters have not changed, but the story has accumulated. Every episode that has aired since 1989 has added to the weight of the story, not by changing the characters but by deepening the context. Homer's 1,000th failure carries more weight than his first. Marge's 1,000th patient sigh is more complex than it was in Season 1. The family on the couch, assembled for the 1,000th time, is not the same as the family on the couch for the first time. The configuration is identical. The history behind it has been building for 36 years. This accumulation is the show's most extraordinary formal achievement. It has managed, through the device of the floating timeline and the episodic format, and the stubborn refusal to allow its characters to age, to produce something that functions simultaneously as comedy in every individual episode and as tragedy across the full run. The tragedy is not in any single episode. It is in the distance between the first season and the 36th. The tragedy is the 36 years that have not passed in Springfield, while passing everywhere else. We have aged. The characters have not. We are older than we were when we first watched Homer fall down the stairs. We have been through things that Springfield has not been through, because Springfield does not go through things in the way that time and circumstance take actual people through things. We have accumulated in the way that living accumulates, and the family on the couch has not accumulated at all. And there is in that gap a specific quality of feeling that the show has never named but has always generated. It is the feeling of looking at a photograph of something beloved. The photograph does not change. The thing in the photograph does not age. But you have aged since the photograph was taken, and the aging makes the photograph mean something different than it did when it was new. The Simpsons is a photograph that has been playing continuously since 1989, and 36 years of watching it have made it mean something different than it did at the beginning, not less. Different. The familiarity has accumulated into a depth that the show itself did not know it was building. This is what you are watching tonight, in the dark, with the volume set low enough that the house can breathe around it. You are watching 36 years of a family being together. You are watching the accumulated weight of all those episodes pressing gently against the surface of the current one. You are watching the photograph play. Homer is going to fall, he always falls. Marge is going to sigh, she always sighs. Bart is going to run, Lisa is going to play. Maggie is going to watch. The family is going to be okay by the end of the episode. It is always okay by the end of the episode. The couch gag is going to deliver them all to the couch in some improbable way, and they are going to be there together, and the living room light is going to be yellow and warm, and the show is going to run its titles, and the next episode is going to start. Fall asleep to it. The family will still be there when you wake up. They always are. 742, Evergreen Terrace, Springfield, wherever Springfield is, which is everywhere, which is wherever you are tonight, in the dark, with the voices of a cartoon family filling the quiet around you. This is the show. This is what it has always been. Not a comedy, not exactly. Something older than comedy and more patient. A story about people who love each other under impossible conditions and keep going anyway. A story that has been running for 36 years without aging a single day. You have been in Springfield for 4 hours tonight. You have heard the saxophone through the closed door. You have watched Homer get up after the fall. You have seen Marge at the kitchen window. You have followed Bart across the rooftops of a town that exists everywhere and nowhere, lit by the warning lights of a nuclear plant that never sleeps. You know this place. You have always known it. It is the place where the family holds together, where the loop keeps running, where the story never ends, because we will not let it end, because ending it would mean letting it go, and letting it go would mean admitting that it was always going to become the past. Not yet. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace still has its lights on. Good night. End of script. Section 17. The specific sadness of brilliant writing in later seasons. The conversation about when The Simpsons changed and whether that change represents a fall from grace or simply the natural evolution of a very long story has been running almost as long as the show itself. By the mid-1990s, viewers were already debating whether the show was as good as it had been. By the early 2000s, the debate had become a kind of cultural shorthand. The Simpsons as the archetype of the show that was once great and then became something else. The phrase early Simpsons took on the quality of a compliment you could give to things that were sharp and dense and honest in specific ways. Late Simpsons became the corresponding diminishment. The debate is real and worth engaging with seriously because it is not simply a story about quality declining, though quality did change. It is a story about a specific kind of writing and what makes that kind of writing possible, and what conditions it requires, and what happens when those conditions change. The writing in the show's peak years was built around a specific relationship between comedy and emotional honesty. The jokes in those seasons were not decorating stories. The jokes were the stories, working on multiple registers simultaneously, doing the emotional work and the intellectual work at the same time, finding the precise word or image or situation that was funny because it was true in a very specific way. The humor was not generated by absurdity alone, though the absurdity was present. It was generated by recognition, by the specific pleasure of seeing something you knew from the inside rendered precisely on the outside. The writers of that era, many of them Harvard graduates who had grown up in the American middle class and were processing their formative experiences through the specific filter of a cartoon about a dysfunctional Springfield family, brought an autobiographical honesty to the material that is not always visible but is always present. The emotional accuracy of Marge's suppressed ambitions, the specific texture of Homer's relationship with failure, the particular loneliness of Lisa's intelligence in an environment that rewards other things. These were not constructed observations. They were lived ones, translated. When those writers moved on, as they inevitably did, the show continued with new writers who were talented and capable, but who had a different relationship to the material. They had the vocabulary. They had the format. They had the characters and the world and the accumulated history that 30 seasons of continuous production had built. What they had differently was the source of urgency. The early writers were writing from proximity. The later writers were writing from inheritance. The result is a show that remains technically accomplished and intermittently brilliant, but that has a different quality of feeling underneath the comedy. The early seasons felt like they had something to say and were finding the best possible way to say it. The later seasons feel more often like they are finding the best possible things to do with what has already been said. The difference is not a failure. It is the natural condition of a story that has outlasted its original urgency. What this means in practice is that the later seasons are more likely to generate comedy from the mechanics of the characters rather than from their depths. Homer falls down more. The plot constructions become more elaborate, more reliant on improbable scenarios, more likely to send the characters to locations that exist primarily because the show has already exhausted the closer ones. The emotional content is thinner, more intermittent, more likely to be gestured at in the final act, rather than running through the episode as its essential content. This is not a disaster. It is, actually, something like the natural history of a long-running creative project. Every artist, every creative team, every show that runs long enough encounters the point at which the original source of energy has been tapped as fully as it can be tapped. And the question becomes what you do with the infrastructure that the original energy built. The Simpsons has been answering that question for the last 15 years or so, with varying degrees of success, and the answer has mostly been, you keep going. You use what you have. You find new ways to deploy the vocabulary. You keep the family on the couch. The remarkable thing is not that the quality changed. The remarkable thing is that anything persists in those later seasons at all. That the characters remain recognizable. That the world retains its specific gravity. That in the middle of a late season episode, something can happen. A moment of genuine feeling, a line of genuine insight, a scene that catches something true about one of the characters, and for a moment the show is completely itself again, dense and precise and honest in the specific way that was always its highest register. These moments exist. They are less frequent than they were, but they are not absent. And when they appear, they carry the full weight of everything the show has built across its entire run. A late season moment of Homer's genuine love for his family lands harder than an early season one would, because it arrives with 30 years of accumulated context. The weight of all the failures, all the near misses, all the distance between what Homer can offer and what the family needs, makes the moments of actual connection heavier than any first season episode could have managed. This is the show's deepest formal achievement, the one that its longevity alone makes possible. It has accumulated enough history with its characters that individual moments carry weight that exceeds their individual merit. The weight is in the history. The history is in the length. The length is the show's most extraordinary quality, and the later seasons, even the diminished ones, are part of the length. They are part of the history. They have added to the weight even if they did not add as much individually. The show is what it is across all of its seasons, not just the golden ones. The later seasons are part of the story. They are Springfield continuing to exist past the point of its original urgency, which is exactly what Springfield does. The town does not end when the energy that created it diminishes. It keeps going. The people keep waking up and going to work and coming home and sitting on the couch. The plant keeps running. The saxophone keeps playing. The family keeps being the family. The show is not less than what it was. It is more than what it was. Because what it was is still there, preserved in every episode that preceded this one, and what it is now has been added to what it was, and the total is larger than any of the parts. Section 18. Homer's friendship and the comedy of male intimacy. Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson are Homer's oldest friends. They have been his co-workers at the nuclear plant for the entirety of his adult working life, which means they have been present in the background of his days for as long as anything else that matters to him. They know him in the specific way that proximity over time creates knowledge, not through deep conversation or emotional intimacy, but through the accumulated observation of a person going about their ordinary daily life. They have seen Homer at work, which means they have seen Homer at his most reliably himself. The friendship between these three men is the show's longest sustained portrait of a specific kind of male friendship, one that operates almost entirely in proximity and almost never in direct emotional expression. Homer, Lenny, and Carl do not have conversations about their interior lives. They do not process feelings with each other. They sit at the bar or stand by the reactor console, and they talk about immediate things, food and sports, and the events of their daily lives at a surface level, and they are together in a way that is clearly important to all of them without any of them saying so. This kind of friendship is real and common and rarely depicted accurately on television, because television tends to require that friendship involve conversation about feelings to be legible as significant. The Simpsons knows better. It is always known that the kind of male friendship it is depicting here does not primarily express itself through conversation, but through sustained presence, through the habit of being in the same place at the same time, through the reliable availability of the same familiar people to occupy the same positions in the landscape of your daily life. Carl and Homer's friendship carries an additional specific quality that the show has developed carefully across its seasons. Carl is more capable than Homer. He is more intelligent, more emotionally competent, more socially functional. He has a college degree. He has managed his own life with a consistency and effectiveness that Homer could not approach. And he chooses to spend his social time at Moe's with Homer and Lenny in the specific low-key companionship of that bar, rather than with the kinds of people his capabilities might have placed in his social circle if he had made different choices. The show has explored Carl's background and motivations in specific episodes, and what emerges is a portrait of a man who has found in Homer's company something that his capabilities alone could not provide. Homer, for all his limitations, is genuinely himself. There is no performance in Homer's company. There is no need to manage an impression or maintain a presentation. Homer is exactly what he appears to be, which in the company of a man as capable as Carl, who is probably always managing some degree of social presentation, is a specific relief. Barney Gumble, who exists in the same social orbit, carries the show's most sustained portrait of a specific kind of waste. Barney, before the alcoholism took hold, was on a trajectory that would have taken him far from Moe's. He was capable. He was engaged. He was the person his high school graduating class might have most expected to succeed in some visible, externally recognized way. And then the trajectory broke, at a point the show has depicted clearly, and the person who might have been was replaced by the person who is. The show handles Barney with an unusual combination of comedy and tenderness. The comedy is in his condition, which is extreme enough to be cartoonishly productive of absurd situations. The tenderness is in the episodes that show, briefly, the person Barney is capable of being when the alcoholism is in remission. There have been episodes in which Barney gets sober, and in those episodes the show shows you who he is underneath the condition. Thoughtful, perceptive, funny in a different register, capable of connection and engagement, and the kind of presence that chronic intoxication prevents. And he goes back. He always goes back. The show does not moralize about this. It does not deliver a message about the importance of sobriety or the tragedy of relapse. It simply shows the going back as what it is, the condition reasserting itself, the easier version of consciousness reclaiming the person from the harder version, and it allows the sadness of that to exist in the frame without framing it as failure. The men of Springfield, the ones who populate Moe's and the plant and the stands at the Springfield Isotopes games, form a community that is rarely seen clearly because it is so consistently deployed as comedy background. But the community is real. These men matter to each other in the specific, unspoken, proximity-based way that is available to them. They show up. They are there. When something happens to one of them, the others gather around it in the way that people who lack the emotional vocabulary for a direct response gather instead by being present, by maintaining their positions in the landscape of each other's lives. Homer is the center of this male community in Springfield in the way that he is the center of his family. Imperfectly, inconsistently, with great affection and limited understanding. He loves these men without examining the love. He would describe them as buddies, as guys, as the people he hangs out with. He would not describe what they actually are, which is the community that holds him in the world outside the house. The people who know him in the register that his family cannot access, the register of a man among men in the ordinary daily life of his work and his leisure and his imperfect, unexamined, genuine belonging. Moe's Tavern deserves its own meditation. It is not simply a bar. It is, within the specific geography of Homer's Springfield, the third space that sociologists identify as essential to human community. Not home, not work, but the place where you are nobody's employee and nobody's family member and just a person who showed up because this is where you go. The specific warmth of Moe's, which the show renders with the same deliberate warmth it uses for the house on Evergreen Terrace, is the warmth of a place that has accommodated the same people for so long that the accommodation has become mutual. The place has shaped itself to them. They have shaped themselves to it. The resulting fit is imperfect and comfortable in the specific way of a chair that has been sat in so many times that it has taken on the shape of the person. Moe himself is underappreciated as a character. He is comic, consistently, in the specific mode of a man whose misanthropy is so complete that it has become its own form of entertainment. But underneath the misanthropy is something the show has earned the right to show, genuine caring for the people who come to his bar. He is rude to them. He overcharges them. He manipulates them when it suits him. And he would do anything for them, in the specific way of a person who has decided that the way he loves is the way he loves, and everyone who does not understand that can find another bar. Homer is Moe's most important customer, not because of the money he spends, but because Homer's presence in the bar anchors the social meaning of the place. Moe's is where Homer goes when the house is too much. Moe's is the place Homer comes back from. The round trip between 742 Evergreen Terrace and Moe's is one of the show's most recurring narrative structures, and it is recurring because it describes something true about how Homer navigates his life. Between the family that needs him to be more than he can be and the bar where nobody needs him to be anything, Homer moves. The bar makes the house survivable. The house makes the bar meaningful. Without one, the other would not work. Section 19. What the Treehouse of Horror tells us about the regular episodes. Once a year, The Simpsons steps outside its own rules. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the Halloween specials that have been a fixture of the show's schedule since the second season, operate in a different register from the canonical episodes. The characters die and come back. The laws of the show's universe are suspended. Horror, actual horror, not the ambient existential dread of a regular episode, but the formal genre kind, is permitted. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are beloved, and the reasons for their popularity are easy to understand. They are formally adventurous. They allow the show's writers to play with genre conventions in ways that the canonical format does not permit. They are funny in a more aggressive way, more willing to push past the limits of what the regular show allows. They are special in the specific sense of being set apart from the normal run of things. But what is most interesting about the Halloween specials is not what they are. It is what they reveal about what the regular episodes are by contrast. The Treehouse of Horror episodes work because they exist in a frame that the audience understands as non-canonical. The deaths do not count. The monsters are not real. The horror is safely contained inside the Halloween label, which signals to the audience that normal rules are suspended for this episode and will return next week. The frame makes the content permissible. The regular episodes of The Simpsons have always operated with their own version of this frame, though it is less explicit. The comedy label, the animated sitcom classification, the family show designation, all of these function as frames that make the show's emotional content permissible in ways that would not be permissible without the frame. The show can depict Homer's cognitive damage as comedy because it is a comedy. It can show Marge's suppressed life as a recurring character note because the format absorbs it. It can portray the specific, grinding sadness of a family living in the shadow of an institution that is slowly poisoning them because the show is funny and the funny makes the sadness survivable. The Treehouse of Horror episodes make this mechanism visible by exaggerating it. They take the show to the place where the frame is the content, where the genre signaling is so explicit that the audience is always aware of it. And in doing so, they illuminate the subtler version of the same mechanism that operates in every canonical episode. The regular Simpsons is always performing a similar sleight of hand. The comedy is always the frame that makes the harder content survivable. The horror in the Treehouse specials is exogenous. It comes from outside, from monsters and aliens and supernatural forces that invade Springfield from beyond its boundaries. The horror in the regular episodes is endogenous. It comes from inside, from the conditions of Springfield itself, from the relationships and the economics and the biology and the psychology of the people who live there. The Treehouse horror is resolved by the end of the episode, safely enclosed in its generic frame. The regular horror is not resolved. It persists. It is the texture of the world the show depicts. This is why the Halloween episodes, for all their quality and creativity and genuine formal ambition, ultimately feel lighter than the best regular episodes. The horror they invoke is real but temporary, entertaining but not true in the specific way that the best episodes of the show's run are true. The Treehouse of Horror episodes know they are horror episodes. The show's most honest work does not know what it is. It is just trying to tell a story about a family, and the story happens to be the most disturbing thing the show has ever produced. Section 20. The music of Springfield and what it carries. The Simpsons has always had an unusual relationship with music. For a comedy, for an animated show, for a production designed to be entertaining above all else, the music in The Simpsons is more complex and more emotionally purposeful than you would expect. Alf Clausen, the show's longtime composer, built a musical language for Springfield that is as specific and as essential to the show's identity as the character designs or the voice performances. The music of Springfield does something that the comedy cannot quite do on its own. It carries emotional content at a level below the jokes, in the register where the show's actual subject matter lives. A scene that is playing as comedy in its dialogue and action might be carrying something entirely different in its musical bed, something that the audience receives without fully processing, that does their emotional work for them without announcing it. The use of music in the sadder episodes is the clearest example of this. The scene of Homer sitting beside Mona Simpson as she dies is carried by music that does not attempt to be consoling. It is present and honest, and allows the sadness its full weight without trying to manage it into something easier to hold. The music does not perform grief. It simply is present alongside it, the way a friend is present alongside grief, not trying to fix it, just being there. The jazzier moments, the ones that accompany Lisa's saxophone playing, and the culture of jazz that the show has associated with her, carry a different kind of emotional content. Jazz in The Simpsons is freedom. It is the sound of intelligence given permission to move, of expression unconstrained by the formal requirements of melody and rhythm that govern more conventional musical forms. When Lisa plays jazz, or when the show's score adopts a jazz register, the sound is telling you something about what it feels like to be Lisa in Springfield. To be someone capable of that particular kind of flight in a place that does not offer much room for it. The theme music itself, The Simpsons' main title, is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in the history of American television. It is immediately identifiable after a single note. It has been heard by virtually everyone who grew up with a television in the English-speaking world in the last 35 years. It is cultural furniture in the most literal sense. A piece of sound that has been placed in so many different spaces, in so many different contexts, in so many different stages of life, that it carries accumulated meaning that no composer could have intended when writing it. The specific quality of the theme music, the way it moves, its tempo and its orchestration, and its particular combination of notes, produces something that has been analyzed from a music theory perspective as technically complex in ways that popular television themes rarely are. The melody is not simple. It is memorable despite its complexity rather than because of its simplicity. And the complexity, the way it keeps moving, the way it never quite settles into the predictable resolution that simpler melodies provide, is itself a statement about what kind of show this is. The music of Springfield is not comfort music. It is music that contains comfort alongside other things. It is music that knows what the show is doing underneath the comedy and responds to that knowledge with a score that carries the full weight of the show's actual subject matter. Every episode of The Simpsons is underscored by music that understands what the episode is really about, and that understanding, accumulated across 36 seasons, is part of why the show sounds the way it sounds when you return to it in the dark. Section 21. The Geography of the Simpson House. The floor plan of 742 Evergreen Terrace has never been fully consistent across the show's run. This is partly because animated productions are not always meticulous about maintaining architectural consistency across episodes, and partly because the house, like Springfield itself, operates according to narrative logic rather than spatial logic. The rooms are where the story needs them to be. The dimensions shift to accommodate the action. The house is smaller in intimate scenes and larger when a larger space is required. But there is a consistent emotional geography to the house that transcends the inconsistencies of its physical layout. Certain rooms carry certain meanings, and those meanings have been stable since the beginning. The kitchen is Marge's space, the place where she is most reliably found, where her competence and her caretaking and her management of the family's daily life are most visible. It is the warmest room in the house in the show's visual language, the most consistently lit with the specific yellow warmth that the show uses to indicate domestic safety. The living room is shared space, the family's space, the place where the couch anchors them together, and the television provides the shared experience that is often their most direct form of being in the same place at the same time. The living room is where the family is most fully assembled, and the assembly, even in its most chaotic and conflict-driven forms, is a version of togetherness that the show treats as valuable in itself. The kitchen and living room, together, constitute the family's public interior, the space of their shared domestic life. The upstairs is the private interior. Each child's bedroom is a distinct world that the show uses as a visual representation of who they are. Lisa's room is books and posters and the saxophone case, and the evidence of a mind that is always engaged with something. Bart's room is accumulated, spontaneous, organized by impulse rather than any systematic principle. The room of a boy who is always in the middle of something and who never quite finishes things. Homer and Marge's bedroom is the space the show visits least frequently, which is itself a statement. The private space of their marriage is given more privacy than any other part of the house. The show enters it when it needs to, for conversations that require the intimacy of a closed door, and then retreats. The bedroom is the room where they are themselves most completely, away from the children and the daily business of family life, and the show respects that privacy in a way that is unusual for a medium that generally finds domestic bedrooms to be productive comic settings. The basement and the garage are Homer's spaces, or more precisely, they are the spaces where Homer's projects live. The endless, abandoned, half-completed projects that accumulate as evidence of Homer's good intentions and limited follow-through. There is something almost archaeological about these spaces in the show. They are stratified layers of Homer's enthusiasms, each layer representing a new direction, a new project, a new version of something Homer was going to do, or build, or become, and did not finish becoming. The house extends in memory as much as in space. The flashback episodes that show the house in different eras, with different children, at different points in the family's history, give it a depth that its physical dimensions do not contain. The house has housed the family through its most significant events. It has been the site of arguments and reconciliations and celebrations and crises, and all of that history is present in the rooms even when the episodes do not reference it directly. The house is the show's most fundamental expression of home as idea rather than location. It is not a specific architectural object. It is the place where the family is. It is the destination that Homer returns to at the end of every episode. It is the place from which Bart and Lisa leave on their adventures and to which they return. It is the place where Marge does her work and maintains the conditions that make everything else possible. If Springfield is everywhere, then 742 Evergreen Terrace is the specific everywhere that matters most. The town can be any American town. The house can only be this house. And this house can only be this family's. Section 22. The specific poetry of Homer's love for food. Homer eats? This is presented as one of his defining characteristics from the very first episode, and the show has sustained it across 36 seasons, with a dedication that suggests it is not simply a character note, but a characterization with content beneath it. The food Homer eats, the donuts and the pork chops and the cheeseburgers, and the specific objects of his most intense culinary devotion are not gourmet. They are not the food of a person who takes pleasure in sophistication or complexity, or the kind of aesthetic engagement that food culture celebrates. They are the food of a person who needs something reliable and immediate and consistently satisfying. The food of someone who has learned to find pleasure in the things that cannot disappoint. There is something in Homer's relationship with food that the show has always used to say things about his relationship with everything else. His love for donuts, specifically, has a quality of devotion that exceeds what a donut reasonably warrants. He does not simply enjoy donuts. He experiences them with an intensity that looks, from the outside, like the intensity of a person who has not had enough of something and is compensating in the available register. The show has made this connection explicit in specific episodes, the ones where Homer's relationship with food is connected to his relationship with comfort, with the specific kinds of comfort he was denied as a child, and the ways he has learned to approximate them through the available means. Food reliably delivers a specific kind of pleasure. It is consistent, it is predictable, it does not require anything of him. It does not evaluate him, it does not leave. Homer's mother left. His father was distant. His earliest experiences of reliable pleasure were, presumably, the simple sensory pleasures of eating. The pleasure that does not require you to be good enough or smart enough or capable enough of whatever the moment demands. The pleasure that is simply there, every time, without conditions. The donut in the break room at the nuclear plant is the same as the donut Homer loved as a child. It has not changed. It does not change. In a life full of things that change in ways Homer cannot manage or understand, the donut remains the donut. Its consistency is its deepest appeal. The show has run with this, finding in Homer's food relationships a source of comedy that is bottomless because it is grounded in something real. The most specific, most particular, most elaborate food sequences in the show, the ones that have become iconic moments in their own right, the ones where Homer imagines food with a voluptuous visual fantasy, are funny, Because they are excessive. They are excessive because the desire is excessive. The desire is excessive because it is compensating for something. And the compensation has been running for Homer's entire life, accumulating daily, expressed in the specific register that is available to him. This is the show's gentlest portrait of a human tendency that it never once mocks. It laughs with Homer's food love, not at it. It renders his sensory pleasure with a warmth and an attention to detail that suggests genuine respect for the experience, even as it places the experience in a comedy frame. Homer loves donuts. The love is real. The object of the love is modest. The show does not suggest that Homer should love something better or more elevated. It renders the love exactly as it is, in its modest, consistent, daily form, and allows that form to be enough. Section 23. The way the show handles time in its best episodes. The show's best episodes share a formal quality that is worth describing precisely because it is what separates them from the competent episodes and from the diminished ones. The best episodes are paced differently. They slow down in the middle. They make room for a scene that does not advance the plot, that exists for the feeling it contains rather than the story function it performs. The episode 22 short films about Springfield is the most explicit example of this quality, the one that made the formal choice most visible. It is an episode structured as a series of vignettes, each one brief, each one focused on a different Springfield character, moving through the town with the unhurried attention of someone who has decided that the people in the background are worth stopping to look at. The episode is not about a plot. It is about the texture of a place, the specific lives that make up the background of every episode that has Springfield in it. The vignettes are funny, but what makes the episode exceptional is the quality of attention it brings to its subjects. It looks at Apu's late-night solitude at the Quickie Mart with genuine curiosity. It follows Chief Wiggum and Principal Skinner through an absurd sequence that manages to say something true about their relationship and their respective failures. It lets Lisa have a moment that is purely about her and her saxophone, with a brevity that makes it more rather than less significant. The episode found a formal solution to a problem the show had always had, which is the problem of its own secondary characters. They were built across years of episodes, each one given enough development to be more than a background prop. But the episodic format did not readily accommodate stories that were not about The Simpsons. 22 short films about Springfield found the solution. Structure the episode as a collection of short stories rather than a single narrative, and use the short story form's natural permission for a scene that exists because it is true, rather than because it moves a plot forward. This formal quality, the willingness to stop and look, the permission to exist in a scene for its feeling rather than its function, is present in the show's best individual episodes outside the anthology format. The episode that ends with Homer sitting with his dying mother. The episode that ends with Lisa playing alone at night. The episode that ends with Homer and Marge holding each other after an argument that almost ended something real. These endings work because the show has learned to slow down for them, to give them the kind of time that feeling requires, and to trust that the audience will stay in the frame for the moment rather than needing the plot to keep moving. The later seasons are less likely to make this formal choice. They are more likely to fill every moment of screen time with action or gag or setup for the next beat. The slowing down, the making room for the feeling, the willingness to exist in a scene for what it is rather than what it leads to, these qualities became less available as the show continued and the premium on pacing increased. But they are there in the archive. Every episode that slowed down at the right moment, that trusted the audience to stay in the feeling for a few seconds without the comedy as insulation, is there in the archive, available to return to. And returning to them in the dark, when the day is done and you have given yourself permission to be still, they work exactly as they were designed to work. They slow you down too. They bring you to the same pace as the scene. They put you in the living room on Evergreen Terrace, or in the hallway outside Lisa's door, or in the hospital room where Homer is holding his mother's hand, and they let you be there, present, in the feeling, for exactly as long as the scene allows. Section 24. The show as archive of a specific American moment. The Simpsons began at the end of the 1980s, in the specific cultural moment that followed the Reagan decade, as the long economic boom of the post-war era had been replaced by something more uncertain, more stratified, more clearly organized around the interests of a specific segment of the population at the expense of the broader middle class that the Simpson family represents. The economic anxiety that runs through the earliest seasons, the specific worry about bills and debt, and the threat of unemployment, and the distance between what a family needs and what a single income from a nuclear plant safety inspector can provide, is historically grounded in a way that the show's later economic concerns are not. The Simpsons in its peak years was depicting a specific thing that was happening to a specific kind of family in a specific American moment, and the specificity gave the depiction a weight that generalized versions of the same concern cannot reproduce. Homer's job at the nuclear plant is the economic center of the family's life, in the way that industrial employment had been the economic center of many American families for decades, and was becoming less so across the period the show was depicting. The plant is the kind of employer that used to be abundant, the large, local, single-industry employer that provided stable work to people without college degrees and that organized the economic and social life of an entire community around itself. By the early 1990s, when the show was establishing itself, this kind of employment was already in decline in the real world, already being replaced by something more precarious and more dispersed. Springfield kept the plant. Springfield kept the stable employment. Springfield kept the specific economic arrangements of the mid-20th century intact, not through any explicit ideological commitment but through the same mechanism that keeps everything else in Springfield intact. The town does not change because the show does not let it change, and the economic arrangements it froze in place in 1989 have become, across 36 years, a document of a way of life that has substantially disappeared from the real world. This is one of the things the show preserves that the audience returns to, not only the family but the specific economic conditions around the family that made that kind of family possible. The single income that covers the mortgage and the groceries and the children's activities, the stable employment that does not require continuous performance management or disruption readiness, or the flexibility to relocate for opportunity. The specific mid-century arrangement in which a man with Homer's qualifications and Homer's work ethic could maintain a family in a house in a town with schools and parks and the basic infrastructure of a stable life. That arrangement was never perfect. The show has never pretended it was. Homer's income is clearly insufficient for the family's needs in specific episodes, and the show has always acknowledged that the Simpsons are economically fragile in ways that their apparent stability does not fully communicate. But the arrangement was real. It existed, and the show, by freezing it in 1989, has preserved it against the passage that has made it increasingly unavailable in the real world. People return to The Simpsons partly for this, for the specific economic geography of a world in which Homer's job is a real job that real people have, rather than a precarious, gig-based arrangement that requires constant hustle and provides no security. The Simpsons is, in this sense, a period piece that does not know it is a period piece. It depicts a way of living that is partly historical and treats it as current because the floating timeline prevents it from becoming historical. The show's Springfield is the America that the America of The Simpsons' original audience grew up in, preserved against all subsequent change, available to return to whenever the actual present becomes too much to hold. This is not the show's central project. It is a byproduct of its formal choice. But the byproduct matters. It is part of why the show feels the way it does in the dark, when you come back to it after a day in the actual current world. It is a world you recognize, a world you were comfortable in, or that you understood, or that at least operated by rules you could follow. A world where Homer's job was secure and the mortgage was manageable and the family was going to be okay. That world does not exist anywhere outside Springfield now. And Springfield will keep it safe, as long as the loop keeps running, as long as the plant keeps humming, as long as the house on Evergreen Terrace keeps its lights on. Section 25. The specific warmth of the endings. The Simpsons has a specific way of ending its episodes that is so consistent across its run that it constitutes one of the show's most important formal elements, one that most viewers have internalized without consciously registering. The endings are warm, not always. There are episodes that end on notes that are not warm, on ambiguities or losses or honest acknowledging of irreducible difficulties. But the modal Simpsons ending, the one the show has chosen most often across its 36 seasons, is warm. The conflict is resolved or set aside. The family is assembled. The joke that closes the episode is usually a gentle one, a final laugh before the credits. The house is lit the way the show lights it when it wants to convey safety. This warmth is a choice. It is the choice of people who understood that the show's emotional register requires this resolution, that the audience cannot be sent to sleep, or to their Monday, or to their lives, carrying the full, unresolved weight of the episode's harder content. The warmth is not dishonest. It is not a betrayal of the complexity that precedes it. It is the show's acknowledgement that comedy, as a form, must ultimately deliver something other than despair, that the people watching have earned a moment of comfort after the difficult content the episode asked them to engage with. The warm ending is the show's promise kept. Every week, regardless of where the episode went, regardless of how dark the middle got, the family is okay at the end. They are together. They are themselves. The house is standing. The joke is landed. You can sleep. This promise is the most important structural element of the show. More important than the couch gag, or the chalkboard, or the treehouse of horror, or any of the show's other formal signatures. The promise that the family will be okay at the end is the organizing principle of the entire enterprise, the thing that makes the harder content bearable, the thing that the audience returns to the show for even when the harder content has been very hard indeed. It is a form of faith, a secular, cartoon faith that the people you love, even the fictional people you love, will be there when the episode ends, that the loop will hold, that the house will keep its lights on, that Homer will find his way home, always, by the end of 22 minutes. The show has kept this faith for 36 years. The warm ending has appeared in hundreds of episodes, in hundreds of different configurations, attached to hundreds of different plots, and it has never failed to do its work. To send you back to your life with the specific comfort of knowing that the family on the couch is okay, that they survived this episode too, that next week they will be there again, the same but different, telling a new version of the same story in the same house, on the same street, in the same impossible town. You are falling asleep to this. The warmth is working. The family is okay. Good night. Section 26. Springfield as a town that knows what it is. There is a line in The Principal and the Pauper episode that the show delivers almost as a throwaway, buried in the legal absurdity of a judge issuing a decree that nobody may mention a certain truth under penalty of torture. The line is delivered in the register of farce, as most of the episode's more extreme moments are, and the farce is real, the comedy is genuine. But underneath the farce is an observation that the show has been organizing everything else around. Communities choose what they know. This is not a cynical observation. It is an anthropological one. Every community, not just Springfield, not just cartoon towns, but actual human communities, from small towns to large cities to nations, operates through a set of shared agreements about what is true and what is allowable, and what will be acknowledged and what will be set aside. The agreements are rarely explicit. They are transmitted through the texture of social life, through what gets discussed and what does not, through what is reported and what passes without comment, through the specific silences that communities maintain around the subjects that would be most destabilizing to acknowledge. Springfield is an exaggerated version of this process, but the exaggeration is not a distortion. It is a clarification. The show takes the normal, ambient process of communal knowledge management and makes it visible by pushing it to its logical extreme. A judge issues a literal decree. A real man is physically expelled from the community. The mechanism that usually operates invisibly is put on screen and allowed to be seen. Once you see the mechanism in Springfield, you see it everywhere. The way that the contamination from the nuclear plant is not discussed. The way that Burns's age is not examined. The way that the annual flooding of the river, or the occasional incidents at the school, or the repeated and unexplained phenomena that should provoke questions, simply do not provoke questions. Springfield has a specific relationship with its own discomforting truths, which is the relationship of a community that has decided those truths are too expensive to confront. The show has never suggested that Springfield's management of its own uncomfortable knowledge is unique. The Springfield residents are not depicted as specially weak, or specially corrupt, or specially incapable of facing facts. They are depicted as normal, as the kind of people who make the kinds of decisions about what to know and what not to know that people everywhere make, all the time, in response to conditions that make knowing certain things costly. The audience, across 36 years of watching Springfield choose its comfortable fictions, has been invited into something that is not simply comedy. It has been invited into a mirror that shows In the specific format of a yellow-skinned cartoon family and their impossible town, the mechanisms of selective reality that actual communities employ. The humor is in the exaggeration. The truth is in the pattern. Springfield knows what it is. It has always known. The three-eyed fish was the admission, decades ago, that something was wrong with the water. The entire population has lived with that admission and decided, without explicit agreement but through the accumulated social pressure of a community that needs its economy and needs its illusions, to file it away, to know it the way you know things that you cannot afford to do anything about. To carry the knowledge without acting on it, which is the specific kind of knowing that is most comfortable to live inside. The show has made this choice its own. It knows what it is. It knows that it has been depicting a family in crisis, a town in contamination, a system organized to produce and maintain damage for 36 years. It has been doing this in the specific register of comedy that permits the knowledge to be present without requiring the audience to bear the full weight of it. The comedy is the thing that makes the knowing possible. The knowing is the thing that makes the comedy matter. Section 27. The specific gift of Bart's defiance. Bart Simpson's defiance is the thing the show gets the most credit for and gives the least credit to. The mainstream understanding of Bart is that he is a rebel, a provocateur, a kid who says no to the systems that say yes and says yes to the things the systems say no to, and that this is fundamentally comedic, a well of content for a cartoon character to draw from. The deeper reading is that Bart's defiance is the most honest response available to a person in his situation. A child who is assessed by an educational system not designed for his intelligence, who lives in a town that the system of power has organized for its own benefit rather than his, who has watched the adults around him accommodate conditions that are not good for anyone and call the accommodation wisdom, has two available responses. He can accommodate, the way Ned Flanders accommodates, the way Homer accommodates, the way most of Springfield has accommodated. Or he can refuse. Bart refuses. Not always coherently, not with a political framework or a developed analysis of what he is refusing or why. The refusal is instinctive. It is the refusal of a person who can feel that something is wrong even when he cannot articulate what the wrongness consists of. His pranks and his truancies and his consistent, cheerful middle finger to the expectations of his environment are not a philosophy, they are a sensation. The sensation of a person who cannot be the thing the world wants him to be and has decided, with the specific clarity of someone who has nothing to lose by the decision, to be something else instead. The tragedy, if there is one, is that the refusal has no constructive outlet in Springfield. Bart can refuse. He cannot build. He can say no to the system, but he cannot build a better one, because building requires conditions that Springfield does not provide. He needs a school that can see him. He needs a father who has the cognitive capacity to engage with who he actually is, rather than who he appears to be. He needs a community that has room for the kind of intelligence he possesses, the lateral, associative, practically brilliant intelligence that has no formal category in Springfield's evaluative infrastructure. He does not have these things. He has the skateboard and the creek and the specific freedom of a child who has concluded that the rules do not apply to him. And he makes of that freedom the best available substitute for the conditions he actually needs. The skateboard is Bart's saxophone. The creek is his room, with the door closed. The freedom of the outdoors, the specific freedom of motion and speed, and the kinetic pleasure of a body that is exactly as young and capable and fast as it currently is the register in which Bart finds the thing that Lisa finds in music. The show has always understood this parallel. Bart and Lisa, for all their surface incompatibility, are doing the same thing in different registers. They are both finding the specific form of expression that their environment cannot suppress, that exists independently of the school's assessment, or the family's management, or the town's ambient judgment about what a child should be doing. Bart on his skateboard and Lisa with her saxophone are each finding the thing that is theirs, that nobody gave them and nobody can take away. This is why Bart matters beyond the comedy. He is the show's portrait of a specific kind of survival, the survival of a person who cannot fit the available forms and discovers, through the specific grace of still being young and still having options, a form of their own. The form is modest. The skateboard is not a career. The defiance is not a philosophy. But it is Bart's, and it is real, and it has carried him through 36 years of the fourth grade without breaking him. The comedy of Bart is the comedy of someone who is irrepressible, who keeps going, who keeps showing up to the next prank and the next adventure and the next desperate attempt to make something happen in a life that the world has organized to make as small as possible. He is irrepressible because the alternatives, being pressed into a shape that does not fit, or being broken by the pressure, are not available to him. He is too alive to be pressed and too committed to his own version of himself to be broken. That is Bart Simpson, the boy who learned that nothing matters and found, in that nothing mattering, a specific freedom that sustains him. The freedom to be exactly who he is in a world that consistently tells him he should be someone else. The freedom of the skateboard, the creek, the prank, the specific pleasure of a 10-year-old boy who is alive and moving and refusing, always refusing, to be the thing the fourth grade needs him to be. Section 28. On watching The Simpsons alone, there are two ways to watch The Simpsons. With other people, which is a social experience organized around shared recognition, around laughing at the same moments, around the specific pleasure of communal enjoyment of a shared cultural object. And alone, which is something else entirely. Alone, without the social framework of laughter to organize the experience, the show becomes more available in its other registers. The comedy is still there. It does not disappear without an audience, but the comedy is no longer the primary experience. The primary experience becomes the family, the house, the specific texture of a world that is familiar in the specific way that a place you have been returning to for most of your life is familiar. Watching The Simpsons alone, in the dark, at the kind of hour when the house is quiet and the day has withdrawn to a manageable distance, produces an experience that is related to but distinct from regular viewing. The episode in the foreground becomes less important. The world in the background becomes more important. You are less invested in the plot's resolution and more interested in the specific quality of light in the kitchen, the particular way Homer's face moves when he is thinking about something he cannot quite articulate, the specific cadence of Marge's voice when she is managing something she would rather not have to manage. Alone, the show becomes a place to visit rather than a performance to watch. And the place it is, once you are inside it without the social pressure to respond to the comedy, is gentler and quieter and more honest than the performed version. The warmth is more accessible. The sadness is more accessible. The specific, persistent tenderness with which the show has always regarded its characters, even when it is deploying them for comedy, is more accessible. This is the condition that this video is designed to facilitate, not the social viewing, not the active engagement with the comedy. The other version, the version where you are in Springfield, in the quiet, with the family going about their business in the middle distance, and you are not watching for anything in particular. You are just there. The Simpsons as a company, as background, as the specific ambient warmth of a familiar world going about its familiar business while you fall asleep, is the show at its most honest. This is what the show has always been building toward, through all the comedy and all the craft and all the accumulated history of 36 seasons. The place it becomes when you stop watching and start inhabiting. Fall asleep to it. The family is there. The house is lit. The loop is running. Springfield is wherever you are, right now, in the dark. You are home. Section 29. The conversation the show has been having with itself. 36 seasons produces a specific kind of internal density. Every new episode exists in relation to every previous episode, whether it acknowledges that relation or not. The characters are not only who they are in the current episode, they are who they have been in 800 previous episodes, and that history is present even when it is not referenced, in the accumulated weight of characterization that even a single performance can carry. The show has been having a conversation with itself for 36 years. Not always a coherent conversation, not always a productive one. There are episodes that seem to be an argument with previous episodes that revise characterizations or introduce information that complicates the established record. There are episodes that seem to have forgotten what the show established and are working from a different premise. The conversation is ongoing and messy and not fully controlled by any single creative intelligence because the show has been made by hundreds of different people over the course of its production run. But within the mess, within the inconsistencies and the revisions and the episodes that do not honor what came before, there is a conversation that runs through the whole. The conversation about who these people are and what they owe each other and what the family means and what the town means and what it means to keep going in conditions that were never designed for your flourishing. Every episode that adds to Homer's portrait of a man damaged by his environment and kept in that damage by the systems around him is in conversation with every previous episode that showed the same thing from a different angle. Every episode that gives Marge a moment of genuine expression is in conversation with every previous episode that showed her suppression. The conversation is not organized. It does not have a central thesis that it is working toward. It has an accumulating truth that it is circling, from different directions, with different tools, across its entire length. The truth it is circling is the truth this video has been examining. The Simpsons is not a comedy. It is the most sustained portrait of American domestic life that the medium of television has produced, organized as comedy, because the comedy is the only format that could hold it for long enough to do what it needed to do. It is 36 years of a family being together and being themselves and loving each other and failing each other and coming back. It is the loop, running. It is Springfield, existing. It is 742 Evergreen Terrace, with the lights on, in the dark, in whatever city you are in right now, wherever you are watching from. The show has been talking to you for 36 years. It has been talking about things that matter to it, about this family, about this town, about this very specific version of the American experience, with a patience and a consistency and a commitment to the subject that no other show has matched. It is talking right now. You have been listening for 4 hours. Fall asleep. The conversation will still be there when you wake up. It always is. Total runtime, approximately 4 hours narrated at a relaxed pace. Designed for voiceover reading at approximately 130 words per minute, yielding a runtime of approximately 5 hours at a gentle, sleep-inducing pace. End of script. Section 30. The lasting image. There is an image the show returns to more often than any other. Not the couch gag, which is always different. Not the chalkboard, which changes. Something simpler and less formal than either of those. Homer, walking across the street toward the house. The camera behind him or to the side, watching him approach the door. His silhouette in the late afternoon light. His specific way of moving. The particular unhurriedness of a man coming home. This image has appeared in so many episodes across the show's run that it has become part of the grammar of Springfield. Homer walking home. Homer at the end of whatever the episode put him through, finding his way back to the house. The house receiving him in the specific way the house receives everyone in this story, by being there, by having the door open or available to be opened, by being the destination that functions as destination regardless of how much has changed or how much has stayed the same. The image is not dramatic. Homer is not running. He is not limping from injury or striding with purpose. He is walking. The specific, slightly heavy, slightly ambling walk of a man who is tired from the day's disasters and headed somewhere that is going to require more of him and toward which he is moving anyway because there is nowhere else. Because the house is where he lives. Because the house is where his family is. Because wherever the episode took him, whatever the plot required of him, this is where the story ends. Homer walking home is the show's clearest statement about what it is. It is the image that contains everything. The man who falls and gets up. The man who is damaged and still moving. The man whose love for his family is not elegant or articulate or even particularly competent, but is completely genuine and completely persistent, and completely the thing that has carried the show across 36 seasons of everything else. He is walking toward the house right now. In some episode, in the archive, he is always walking toward the house. The sun is setting on Springfield. The cooling towers are visible in the background. The street is the same street it has always been. And Homer is walking home, as he has always been walking home, as he will always be walking home, in the specific, permanent, imperfect way of a man who goes back to the people he loves, because going back is the only thing he has ever truly known how to do. The show has not changed this. It will not change this. The image will persist as long as the show persists. Which is to say indefinitely, which is to say forever in the specific sense that anything preserved can be said to last forever. As long as there is a screen and a way to reach the archive and a person willing to watch, Homer will be walking home. And somewhere in Springfield, the house will be there to receive him. The lights are on, the door is unlocked, the family is inside. Section 31. What Marge knows that nobody else does. There is a quiet wisdom in Marge Simpson that the show deploys so consistently and with such restraint that most episodes do not announce it as the episode's subject. It is simply present in the specific quality of her attention to the people around her, in the way she reads situations before anyone else in the room has processed what is happening. Marge knows Homer. She has known Homer for longer than anyone else, in the specific register of knowing that comes from decades of close observation of a person who is not hiding from you, but who is not particularly capable of direct communication about his inner life. She has learned to read Homer not through his words, which are unreliable, but through the specific combination of small signals that constitute Homer in his undefended moments. The way he goes quiet, the specific kind of distraction that signals distress rather than inattention, the quality of his physical presence in a room when something is wrong. This knowledge is invisible to most of the episodes because it rarely announces itself. Marge does not explain her understanding of Homer. She does not have scenes where she processes her perception of him for the audience's benefit. She simply acts on the knowledge, sometimes in ways that the episode's comedy presents as Marge being long-suffering or patient, when the accurate reading is that she is responding with remarkable precision to information that nobody else in the scene is equipped to read. She knows Bart in the same way. She knows the real Bart, the one underneath the performance. She has always known him, from the moment the show began to develop him as a character with an interior that his exterior does not fully reveal. Marge's love for Bart is not unconditional in the sentimental sense of loving someone regardless of what they do. It is unconditional in the more specific sense of loving someone completely, including the parts they hide, including the parts that cause damage. She loves the real Bart, the one she can see even when nobody else can. The knowledge costs her something. Marge is the person in the family who is most consistently aware of the gap between what the family needs and what it has, between what Homer can offer and what the family needs from him, between what the school can provide Bart and what Bart actually requires, between what Springfield has to give Lisa and what Lisa deserves. She sees all of this clearly, and she manages it, and she does not lay down the management because the management is the thing that keeps the family functional. The specific quality of Marge's wisdom is that it is practical. It does not aspire to resolution. It does not look for the moment when the fundamental asymmetries are corrected and everyone gets what they need and the family is finally properly okay. It operates in the available conditions, managing what can be managed, holding what can be held, making the best available use of the specific people she is working with, who are Homer and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, which is to say she is working with an impaired man, a boy who refuses the available forms, a girl who is too perceptive for her environment, and an infant of unknown depth and infinite patience. She keeps going. Every episode she keeps going, not because she has resolved the difficulty, not because the fundamental challenges have been addressed. Because the family is there and the family needs the specific thing that Marge provides, which is the steady, intelligent, practically wise presence of a person who sees clearly and does not use the clarity as an excuse to stop. That is Marge's most extraordinary quality. She sees everything, and she stays anyway, not as a martyr, as a choice, made and remade, in full knowledge of what the choice contains. The show has been making this observation across 36 seasons, in the specific visual grammar of Marge in the kitchen, Marge at the foot of the stairs, Marge in the passenger seat on a family trip, Marge wherever the family is, because that is where she has placed herself. Seeing everything, managing what can be managed, holding what can be held, still there, still choosing. Section 32. The blue and the yellow. Springfield is yellow. This is the observation that the show has always presented as visual style, and that is something more than that when you hold it for a moment and let it ask its own question. Why are the people of Springfield yellow? The official answer is that it is Matt Groening's art style, that yellow skin was chosen for its distinctiveness on television, that it is a design decision rather than a statement. And this is true. The yellow skin has a production history and a rationale that is entirely aesthetic. But the show has been aware, across its run, that the yellow skin carries content beyond aesthetics. The visual distinction between Springfield residents and visitors from outside, which the show has maintained consistently, is the visual distinction between people who have lived inside the contamination zone and people who have not. Visitors are drawn with more naturalistic proportions. more normal eye shapes, skin that reads as more humanly pigmented. The Simpsons are yellow. Their neighbors are yellow. The people of Springfield are yellow. The blue of Marge's hair is the other half of Springfield's visual grammar. In a town of yellow, the blue is the specific thing that marks Marge as distinctively herself, as the character who carries the most interior life, as the person whose visual signature encodes something about her relationship to the world around her. Blue is the complementary color to the yellow of Springfield, the color that most directly contrasts with the dominant visual tone of the world she inhabits. Marge is the blue thing in the yellow world. She is the cool thing in the warm world. She is the interior in the exterior world. The blue hair, for all its absurdity as a physical object, is doing exactly this work in the visual grammar of the show. It marks Marge as the character who exists in a different register from the rest of Springfield, who sees differently, who is oriented differently, whose presence in the frame is always slightly in contrast to the world the frame contains. The yellow and the blue have been in the same frame for 36 years. They have been in the same house, the same family, the same living room. The warm yellow world of Springfield and the cool blue presence of the woman who holds it together. The contamination and the clarity. The damage and the person who manages the damage. This is the show's oldest visual joke, and its deepest one. Section 33. Finding rest in Springfield. You have been here for a while now. The house is quiet. Whatever the day was, it is behind you now. Springfield is doing what it does in the dark. The specific, gentle business of a cartoon world that never fully stops. The hum of the plant and the sound of the river and the specific quality of the light on Evergreen Terrace at whatever hour this is. The family is going to be okay. They are always going to be okay. That is the promise the show makes and keeps, episode after episode. In the warm ending and the couch gag and the specific persistence of the Simpsons on their couch, in their house, in their impossible, beloved, everywhere and nowhere town. Homer is home. Marge has made something in the kitchen that the family will eat without properly appreciating. Bart has done something inadvisable but survived it. Lisa is reading or playing, and the saxophone is audible if you know to listen for it. Maggie is watching everything. The loop is running, the show is there. Springfield is wherever you are. Rest now. The family is fine. They will be there when you need them. Good night. Section 34. The specific quality of Saturday morning. There is a version of The Simpsons that only exists in memory. The version that aired on Sunday nights in the early 1990s, when the show was new and urgent and its tonal territory had not yet been charted by the audience or by the show itself. The version that was being discovered in real time, by writers who were still learning what the characters could do and by an audience that was still learning who the characters were. That version is in the archive now, alongside everything that came after it. The early seasons and the peak seasons and the later seasons and the seasons that are running right now, all of it in the same archive, all of it accessible, all of it carrying the specific weight of when it was made. The early episodes carry the weight of a show finding itself. The peak episodes carry the weight of a show that knows exactly what it is and is using every tool available to say it. The later episodes carry the weight of a show that is still going, because going is what it has always done. All of these versions are The Simpsons. The one you fell in love with first, the one that defined the show for you, the one you return to most often, is the version that lives most vividly in your personal archive of the show, the archive that exists in the specific part of your memory that has been accumulating Simpsons since the first episode you ever watched. But it exists alongside all the other versions. The show is not only the version you love best, it is the 36-year-long entity that contains all of its versions simultaneously. This is one of the privileges of a very long run. The show has enough history that different people can love different versions of it and all be loving the same thing. The person who loves the early seasons is loving The Simpsons. The person who loves the peak seasons is loving The Simpsons. Even the person who only knows the later seasons, who grew up with a different version of the show, and for whom those later episodes carry the same nostalgic weight that the earlier ones carry for older viewers, is loving The Simpsons. The show is large enough to contain all of these loves. It is long enough to have been different things at different times, without becoming something other than itself. Its continuity is not the continuity of a single unbroken vision. It is the continuity of a family that keeps going, generation after generation, changing in response to circumstance while remaining recognizably itself in the ways that matter most. That is The Simpsons. That is what you are falling asleep to. Section 35. The final meditation on what the show gave us. When you were younger, The Simpsons was funny. This is not diminishment. The comedy was brilliant and dense, and reached for things that television comedy had never reached for before, and it was genuinely, reliably, inventively funny in ways that shaped how comedy was made for 30 years after it began. The comedy was the point. The comedy was the thing, and then you got older. And the episodes you watched when you were younger started to mean something different. The Homer episodes that were funny started to feel heavy in a way that they did not feel when you first watched them. The Marge episodes that were played for laughs started to carry the weight of everything you understood now that you did not understand then. The Lisa episodes that were moving in an abstract way became moving in a specific way because you were old enough now to have been Lisa, to have been the person in the room who understood too much and was understood too little. The show did not change. You changed. And the show, through the specific mechanism of its permanence, its floating timeline, its refusal to age, was still there in the form it had always been in, waiting for you to bring your changed self to it, waiting to show you what it had always contained, the things you could not see the first time, the things that require a certain amount of living before they are accessible. This is the show's deepest gift. Not the comedy, though the comedy is extraordinary. The deepest gift is that it has 36 seasons of content, each one of which can be experienced differently at different points in a life. The episodes that made you laugh at 10 might make you cry at 40, not because they have changed, but because the accumulated experience of living has made you available to things that were always in the episodes, waiting for you to be old enough to receive them. Homer falling down the stairs is funnier when you are 10. The sight gag is complete and sufficient. When you are older and you know something about what it is to keep falling and keep getting up, about the specific texture of a life in which you keep doing the same things and getting the same results and doing them again anyway, because what else is there? The sight gag is still funny, and it is also something else. It is recognition. It is the specific comfort of seeing something you know from the inside rendered precisely on the outside. The Simpsons grows with you. It grows with you because it is long enough and deep enough and sufficiently honest about human experience that it has something available for every stage of a life. You can watch it young and watch it middle-aged and watch it old, and each time you will find the same show presenting itself differently in response to who you currently are. This is not something that comedy alone can do. It requires the honesty that runs under the comedy. It requires the specific, patient, sustained attention to who these characters are that the show has maintained across 36 seasons. It requires the emotional architecture that was there from the beginning, the wounds and the love and the persistence and the damage, all of it, present in every episode, waiting for the right viewer at the right age to bring the right life to it and find what was always there. The Simpsons gave us this. 36 years of a family being together and loving each other imperfectly and keeping going anyway, organized as comedy so that we could watch it from the beginning of our lives, and gradually revealing itself as something else as we grew into the audience it had always been waiting for. The family on the couch, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the loop, running, Springfield, everywhere. You are in it now. Stay as long as you need. End of script. Word count. Approximately 40,500 words. Estimated narrated runtime at 130 words per minute. Approximately 5 hours and 10 minutes. Section 36. The house at the end of everything. If you had to describe what The Simpsons ultimately is in the smallest possible number of words, after all 36 seasons and all the theories and all the character studies and all the careful examination of what the show has been doing underneath its comedy for its entire existence, you would probably arrive at something like this. A family that keeps going. Not a family that succeeds. Not a family that achieves. Not a family that resolves its fundamental contradictions, or heals its structural wounds, or becomes, through the accumulated effort of 36 seasons, a better version of itself. A family that keeps going. That wakes up tomorrow in the same house and deals with the same conditions and loves each other in the same imperfect, persistent, irreducible way, and keeps going. Homer will fall down and get up, He will fail and apologize and fail again, and apologize again and keep showing up because showing up is the one thing he can always do. Marge will hold it together with a patience that costs more than anyone around her quite understands and will find, in the holding, something that is sufficient for her even if it is not everything. Bart will refuse and deflect and find his specific, sideways way through the world. Lisa will see too much and say too much, and play her saxophone in her room when the seeing and saying become too heavy to carry. Maggie will watch. She will always watch. The cooling towers will keep blinking their slow red lights over Springfield. The river will keep running past the plant in the direction it has always run. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace will stand in its specific position, on its specific street, in its specific impossible town, with the lawn in approximately the right condition, and the mailbox still leaning at its characteristic angle, and the lights on in the windows at whatever hour the episode is set. Homer will walk home. He always walks home. Whatever the episode did with him, wherever the plot required him to go, he walks back to the house because the house is where the family is, and the family is the thing he keeps going for. The walk is unhurried. The walk is not triumphant. It is the walk of a man who is tired and damaged and limited and completely, stubbornly, indestructibly oriented toward the people waiting for him inside. That is what the show has been showing you. That is what you have been watching. The most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing a person can do. Going home every day. Whatever the day was, going home. The Simpsons will be there when you wake up, so will you. That is the whole thing. Good night.